He was the most feared Alpha King in 7 generations, a man who could silence a room with one look and break a rival pack's will before the first blade was drawn. And in one night, driven by pride and another woman's poison, he signed the exile order for the only person who ever made him human. This is the story of what power costs when you spend it on the wrong war. Watch until the end, because what Kaelin Thornheart destroys tonight will take a lifetime to rebuild. Hit like, subscribe, and drop your city in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from. You're part of this story too. The morning the exile order was signed, the sky above Thornkeep was the color of an old wound, bruised purple at the edges, bleeding orange where the sun hadn't quite cleared the mountains yet. It was the kind of sky that belonged on a battlefield, not above a court ceremony, not above a Luna's last hour inside her own walls. Selene Ashwin had been awake since before the dark lifted. She sat at the edge of the bed she had shared for 3 years with a man she had chosen freely, in a room that smelled like pine resin and the particular cold that came off the high granite peaks. Her hands were flat on her thighs. Her spine was straight. She had not slept in 2 days, and the child growing inside her had been restless all night, pressing and shifting as though he already understood that something was wrong with the world outside the womb. She understood it too. The door to the chamber opened without a knock. That was the first signal. No knock, no announcement, just the guard's boots on the stone floor, and behind him, the sound of more boots. Selene did not turn around. Luna Ashwin. The guard's voice was carefully empty. He had been assigned to her corridor for a year. His name was Den. She had brought him a meal once when the kitchens forgot his rotation. He did not meet her eyes now. His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room, immediately. She stood. She smoothed the front of her dress with both palms. She walked. The throne room of Thornkeep was built to make people feel small. Kaelin Thornheart had not designed it that way. It had been his grandfather's vision, all vaulted black stone and iron torch brackets, and a ceiling that disappeared into shadow 40 feet overhead. But Kaelin had kept it. He had understood instinctively what the architecture communicated, that the one on the throne was not the same species as the one standing on the floor below, that the distance between the dais and the doors was not measured in feet, but in consequence. Selene had walked that distance 100 times. She had stood at Kaelin's side on that dais and felt the power of the room as something they shared. Tonight she crossed it alone, and every foot of cold stone reminded her that the room had been designed for exactly this, for someone to be made very, very small. The court was assembled, full assembly. Every pack lord, every noble house with a seat in Thornkeep, every senior advisor and war commander who could be roused and dressed and standing upright before dawn. Their faces were a study in controlled appetite. Some kept their expressions blank, others let just enough satisfaction show to mark themselves as enemies she'd have to remember later. Later, she told herself. File it away. There is always a later. Kaelin stood in front of the throne, not on it. He was a tall man, built like something quarried rather than born. Wide shoulders, a jaw that looked carved, eyes the color of deep water in winter. He was wearing his formal armor, which meant someone had prepared him for this. Someone had helped him dress for the execution before sunrise. He was not looking at her when she entered. He was staring at the far wall, jaw set, that particular muscle in his temple working the way it did when he was holding something locked down behind his teeth. Vesper Vale stood to his left. Selene had known Vespera for 2 years since the woman had arrived at court as a diplomatic representative of the Vale Lowland Pax. She was precisely the kind of beautiful that courts weaponized, the kind that looked effortless, that seemed too calm in every room, that made other women check their own reflection when she walked past. She held a folded document in her hands, and her expression was arranged into something that read as reluctant duty if you didn't know how to look. Selene knew how to look. Luna Selene Ashwin. The court herald read from a scroll without making eye contact. His voice bounced off the black stone and came back smaller. You have been summoned before His Majesty Alpha King Kaelin Thornheart to answer charges brought by Lady Vespera Vale of the Southern Coalition regarding conduct unbecoming of a Luna and crimes against the integrity of the royal bloodline. The room did not make a sound. Celine stopped walking at the designated mark on the floor. A slight discoloration in the stone from centuries of feet standing in exactly that spot, below exactly that level of scrutiny. She lifted her chin. Her hands stayed loose at her sides. "Then let the charges be spoken," she said. Her voice came out steadier than her pulse. Vespera unfolded the document. She did not look at it. She had memorized what she was going to say, which meant she had rehearsed it, which meant she had planned this across weeks or months of careful preparation, while Celine had been spending those same weeks managing border disputes and Pack Alliance dinners, and the particular exhaustion that came in the early months of a pregnancy she had not yet announced publicly. 3 months ago, Vespera began, her voice carrying the particular weight of someone performing reluctance, I observed Luna Ashwin in a private meeting with Commander Aldrich Fenn of the Western Ridge Garrison. The meeting took place after the official inspection had concluded in the garrison's East Annex, with the doors closed and no attendants present. I did not speak of it immediately. I told myself there was an innocent explanation. She paused exactly long enough for the court to fill the silence with their own imaginations. 2 months ago, I received testimony from a garrison servant who was present in the adjacent room. The servant heard things that could not be explained by official business. And what things were those? Celine asked. I'll speak directly, my Luna. The title sat in Vespera's mouth like something decorative she didn't intend to keep. Intimate things, specific enough that I have no reasonable doubt about their nature. The room breathed differently. Celine felt it. The collective intake, the shift in posture, the way attention sharpened into something more like predation. The child you carry, Vespera said, is not His Majesty's heir. Celine turned her head and looked at Kaelin. He was still staring at the far wall. The muscle in his jaw was working steadily now, a slow, rhythmic clench, and his hands at his sides were curled into partial fists, not tight enough to read as anger, tight enough to tell her he was fighting to stay still. Kaelin. She said his name deliberately without the title. That choice rippled through the room. She saw it on faces, the small flinches at the breach of protocol. She didn't care. He was her husband. She would say his name. Look at me. He turned his head. His eyes found hers, and for half a second she saw something in them that was not certainty. A flicker of something that might have been doubt, or grief, or the ghost of the man who had stood beside her in this same room 3 years ago and made a vow in front of every person who was now watching her bleed. Then his face shut down. The evidence has been reviewed, he said. His voice came out flat and formal, the Alpha King voice, the one that had no give in it. Multiple testimonies have been collected. The pattern of information is consistent. What pattern? It came out as a statement, not a question, because she already knew it didn't matter. Whatever Vespera had built, she had built it carefully. Meetings with Commander Fenn across a 6-month period, correspondence intercepted by the court seal office. Physical testimony from 2 garrison staff and 1 court servant. He paused. And a blood work assessment from Master Henrik, who examined you last month for the standard early pregnancy review. The blood work. Celine's chest went cold. Master Henrik serves the crown, Kaelin said. His assessment indicated markers inconsistent with... He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. Markers inconsistent with Thornheart bloodline heritage. Master Henrik's assessment, Celine said carefully, was conducted while I was unwell. I had been running a fever for 3 days. The results were anomalous, and he flagged them himself as requiring follow-up evaluation. He did flag them. He also provided them to the Crown Seal as required under Royal Medical Protocol. Kaelin. She said his name again, softer this time. Look at what you're doing. I am looking at it. Something cracked through his formal tone, brief and sharp, like a seam giving way. Do you understand that I don't want this to be true? Then investigate it properly. Give me time to bring Commander Fenn here and let him speak. Let me bring my own witnesses. Give me a week. The court is assembled. The evidence has been presented. He looked away from her again. He looked at the floor between them, that expanse of cold stone, and his face did something complicated that she couldn't quite read from where she was standing. A decision has to be made. Does it? Her voice went very quiet. Does it have to be made right now, at dawn, in front of everyone, without giving me a single hour to answer a single accusation with anything other than my word against hers? Vespera moved slightly, the smallest adjustment of her weight, and it was calculated. A subtle reminder that she was still in the room, still waiting, still the source of all this. The longer a decision is deferred, Vespera said, addressing Kaelin rather than Celine, her voice modulated into something that sounded like counsel from a trusted advisor, the more the court interprets it as uncertainty. Uncertainty undermines authority. And authority is the only thing standing between this pack and the wolves who've been watching our eastern borders for 3 seasons. Kaelin's expression hardened. There it was. That was the engine of this. Not just jealousy or wounded pride. Vespera had attached her accusation to a real political pressure, a real military anxiety, something Kaelin had been managing and losing sleep over for months. She had found the weight he was already carrying and added herself to it, positioned herself as the person helping him bear it. Celine looked at the woman and understood with a clarity that felt almost peaceful. This had been planned for at least a year, possibly longer. Kaelin, Celine said. Her voice was steady. She was choosing every word with the precision of someone diffusing something. I have been faithful to you. This child is yours. I will swear it on anything you name, in front of any authority you choose, under any condition of scrutiny you apply. I am asking you not for a pardon. I am asking you for the right to answer a charge before you issue a verdict. The silence held for 5 full seconds. Then Kaelin straightened. He squared his shoulders. He looked at her, and this time his eyes were entirely the wrong thing. Flat, decided, locked down behind something that had been building in him before she ever walked into this room. The charges stand, he said. By the authority of the Thornheart Crown and the laws of the Northern Pack Confederacy, Luna Celine Ashwin is hereby stripped of her title and rank. She is exiled beyond the Northern Wastes, effective at sunrise. She is forbidden from returning to any territory under Crown protection. She is... His voice roughened for exactly 1 syllable, then smoothed out again. She is to take no property of the Crown. She is to depart on foot. On foot. In a pregnancy. Across the northern wastes. Someone in the court made a small sound. A few of the pack lords shifted their weight. Even some of the faces that had been leaning toward satisfaction went briefly uncertain at that specific condition. Celine did not move. On foot, she repeated. There will be a supply pack provided. The amendment came quickly, too quickly, and it told her that somewhere behind the lockdown expression there was still a person who had just heard himself say something he knew was wrong. 3 days of provisions and appropriate cold weather gear. You are generous, she said. Not sarcasm, something colder than that. Observation. Celine. He said her name the way she had said his, without the title, without the ceremony, just the name, just the 2 people inside this enormous, awful room. I need you to go. I know you do. She held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she turned away from him and walked back across the floor, back through the silence of the assembled court, back toward the great doors of the throne room. She did not beg. She did not make a scene for the room to consume. She did not give Vespera Vale the satisfaction of watching her collapse. But before she reached the doors, she stopped. She turned around one last time. The child is yours, she said, loud enough for the room, clear enough for the record, whatever record anyone was keeping. You will remember I said that. Then she walked out. But they gave her 40 minutes to pack. Den stood outside the chamber door while she moved through it, pulling together the things she could carry without breaking her body over hard miles. She worked fast and without ceremony. Warm underlayers, 2 pairs of wool socks, the knife she kept under the mattress that no one but she knew about, the small folded square of leather that held the documents she'd been quietly accumulating across the past year for reasons she hadn't been able to name clearly until right now. Preparation, she thought. She had been preparing for something without knowing what the something was. Her hands shook twice. Once when she was rolling her spare boots and her knuckles hit the corner of the chest and the pain was sharp and clarifying. Once when she passed the small carved figure on the windowsill, a wolf, rough cut from dark wood, that Kaelin had made himself in the early months of their bonding, because he'd been embarrassed to buy something and wanted to make something instead. She remembered laughing at it because it looked more like a dog than a wolf, and he had refused to admit that, which made her laugh more, and the sound of that laughter was so far from this room and this morning that it felt like something that had happened to different people. She left the figure on the sill. She was buttoning the last layer of her coat when the door opened and Mira came in. Mira was her personal attendant, a small woman in her 40s, quick-fingered and fiercely competent, who had been assigned to Celine's household on her second month in Thornkeep. She was not supposed to be in this room right now. The guard on the door had apparently looked the other way. "You have 10 minutes, Mira said, her voice low and compressed. Her eyes were red, but her hands were already moving, pulling things from the dresser that Celine had missed, tucking them into the pack with practiced efficiency. "I've put money in the lining of the coat, left side seam. Don't reach for it until you're outside the walls." "Mira, there's a letter inside the inner pocket. Address on the front. If you make it to Harrow's Crossing before the first hard freeze, go there. The people there will not ask questions." She cinched the pack's top strap and pressed it into Celine's hands. Her voice went rougher. "The child is healthy. Whatever that assessment said, it was wrong, or it was tampered with. You know your own body." "I know," Celine said. "So does he." Mira looked at the door, then back. "He knows." Celine absorbed that. Let it sit. There were things she could do with that knowledge later. Right now it was just a stone she had to carry. "Go," Mira said, while Den's still feeling cooperative. The northern gate of Thornkeep opened just wide enough to let one person through. The sun was barely up, a thin silver line above the mountains, the kind of early light that gave nothing warmth. The supply pack on Celine's back weighed about 8 pounds. The ground outside the gate was iron hard with the first deep cold of the season, the grass already pulled to rust and gray. She stood in the opening for a moment. Behind her, the gate mechanism was already grinding back into place, the great chain-driven counterweights doing their work. She didn't look behind her. There was nothing behind her that she needed to see right now. She looked at the mountains. The northern waste began about 6 miles out. That was where the managed land gave way to terrain that the packs had never fully domesticated, a stretch of high rock and old-growth pine and weather systems that made their own rules. 3 days of provisions. 6 miles to the wastes. Another 40 or more beyond that to anything resembling safe shelter, if Mira's letter was correct about Harrow's Crossing. Her body was already calculating. Pregnancy had sharpened some of her senses and dulled others in complicated ways. She tired faster on uphills, but her awareness of temperature and terrain had become almost preternatural. The child inside her was mourning still, quiet, as though conserving something. She started walking. The anger came about a mile out. She had been expecting grief. She had been braced for it, the kind of collapse that comes when the adrenaline of performance wears off and the actual dimensions of a loss reveal themselves. Instead, she got anger, which was cleaner and more useful. It organized itself into specifics rather than dissolving into general despair. Vespera had prepared this for at least a year. She had secured testimony, fabricated correspondence, interfered with a medical examination. She had known which anxieties to exploit: the eastern border pressure, the court's latent concern about an heir, Kaylin's particular vulnerability to pride-based manipulation. And Kaylin had let her. That was the part that lived just below the anger, the part she kept bumping against and having to step back from. Kaylin had let her. Not because he was stupid, not because he was deceived beyond any reasonable person's threshold, because some part of him, under pressure and under siege, and faced with a choice between trusting his wife and trusting the political ground beneath his feet, had chosen the ground. She understood it, which was the worst thing. She could trace the logic of it, and she still could not forgive it. The mountains didn't get closer for a long time. That was the thing about walking through open terrain. The scale of it worked against you, made the landmark seem fixed while you moved. She focused instead on the ground directly in front of her feet, on the rhythm of her own stride, on the small adjustments she made at each rise in the terrain to protect her center of gravity. She thought about the child. She had known for weeks now, in the way she couldn't explain, that the child was a son. He had gone still in a way that didn't feel like stillness so much as listening. She'd had that thought several times in the past month, The strange sense that the child was aware of the world outside the womb in some diffuse and receptive way, taking information in. She kept her breathing even and her posture as steady as the terrain would allow, and she thought, "Not yet. You don't have to know this yet. You have time." She didn't know if that was true. She didn't know much. She knew she was 3 months pregnant and exiled on foot in early winter from the only home she'd built as an adult. She knew the charge against her was fabricated, and the man who had believed it had done so at least partly because it was convenient to believe it. She knew that wherever she ended up, she would have to rebuild, which meant she would have to survive the distance between here and there first. Survival was not a noble pursuit. She had heard it described that way, as something almost romantic, the human will asserting itself against adversity. In her experience, survival was just problem-solving with a higher stakes. You identified what you needed, you assessed what you had, you moved toward the intersection. It didn't require courage so much as it required the willingness to keep moving forward while thinking clearly. She was good at thinking clearly. At mile 3, she stopped at a stream that hadn't yet frozen and drank from her cupped hands and ate one of the hard biscuits from the supply pack and allowed herself 5 minutes of sitting on a flat rock while she assessed her feet and her breathing and the particular ache that had started in her lower back. Then she got up and kept walking. The Western Garrison was 6 days' ride from Thornkeep under normal conditions. It was also not a place anyone would think to look for a route south if they were assuming an exile would follow the logical northward path. Celine had been thinking about the letter in her inner pocket all morning, turning over what Mira had said about Harrow's Crossing, measuring it against what she knew about the territory between here and there. Harrow's Crossing was in the foothills, not north, southeast. The supply pack contained 3 days of provisions calculated for a northward route. Anyone who had thought about the mathematics of her exile had assumed she would go north, as ordered, into the wastes, where the cold in the terrain would do the work that an execution order would have done less cleanly. 3 days of provisions going north would leave her in the deep wastes with nothing, no shelter, no viable path forward. Going southeast instead would put her against harder terrain in the first 2 days. The ridgeline between Thornkeep's eastern border and the foothills was steep and rocky, and there was no maintained path. But the foothills themselves were sheltered from the worst of the early winter weather, and 3 days of provisions heading that direction would bring her to the edge of Harrow's Crossing territory with a half-day's margin. She had already decided. She just had to pick the moment to turn southeast without being visible from the walls. The walls disappeared behind the terrain curve at mile 4. She turned southeast. The first night she spent in the hollow of a deadfall cedar, wrapped in everything she'd packed and listening to the cold work its way through the wood around her. She did not sleep so much as drift in and out of a shallow vigilance, surfacing every hour or so to assess sound and temperature and the state of her body. The child moved at some point near midnight, a long, slow roll, the unhurried kind that meant he was dreaming, and the feeling of it in the dark was the closest thing to comfort she was going to get. "I know," she said quietly, to the dark, to him. "I'm working on it." The second day was harder. The ridgeline rose steeply about a mile in, and she had to use her hands on the rock face for 2 of the ascending sections, which wrenched the back pain into something more insistent and slowed her pace significantly. She ate the last of the hard biscuits at midday and started on the dried meat, rationing by feel since she didn't want to stop long enough to count. She thought, on that climb, about Vespera Vale. Specifically, she thought about what Vespera wanted. Not what she had wanted in the immediate sense, Celine's removal, but what she actually wanted. The court at Thornkeep was not an end in itself for someone with Vespera's patient precision. She had spent years positioning herself. She had taken enormous risks by manufacturing this kind of elaborate evidence. That suggested an objective substantial enough to justify the risk, not just influence at court, not just proximity to power. Something structural. Something that would outlast one court season. If the Heir was gone and the Luna was gone, the Alpha King was formally unbound. Celine stopped on the ridge with the wind hitting her face and worked through it. An unbound Alpha King, under the Northern Pack Confederacy's founding laws, was required to seek a new bond within 2 years of a documented dissolution to maintain his legal authority over multi-pack territory. The law had been written to prevent power vacuums. It had the side effect of making the Alpha King's bond a political resource. Whoever he bonded with next would hold the Luna's seat and all the institutional weight that came with it. Vespera Vale of the Southern Coalition. Luna Vespera Thornheart of the Southern Coalition, binding Thornkeep's resources and political relationships to the southern lowland territory she represented. Celine stood on the ridge for 30 more seconds. Then she kept climbing. On the third day, coming down out of the foothills, she found the road. It was barely a road. 2 parallel depressions in the earth where carts had traveled long enough to pack the soil, half obscured by encroaching undergrowth. But it had direction, and it moved southeast, and when she followed it around a long curve of hill, she could smell wood smoke. Harrow's Crossing was 11 buildings arranged around a crossroads, none of them newer than 40 years, all of them weathered to the particular gray that came from being exposed to mountain weather long enough for the paint and the wood to reach a kind of truce. There was a common hall at the center, smoke coming from its chimney in the thin gray afternoon. She found the address from the letter, a house at the far end of the crossroads, set slightly back from the main cluster, with a garden that had been carefully put to bed for winter. She knocked. The woman who answered was in her 60s, built square and solid, with the kind of face that had worked outdoors most of its life. She looked at Celine for 3 full seconds before she stood back from the door. "Mira's friend," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Celine said. "You look like hell." She stood back further. "Get in here." "What?" Her name was Cora. She ran the smallest of Harrow's Crossing's 3 remaining households with quiet competence, and asked no questions about where Celine had come from or why she had blood on her right knee from the ridgeline descent. She fed her, showed her to a room with a real bed, and left a pot of water heating on the hearth without being asked. In the morning, she came to the room with tea and sat in the chair by the window while Celine drank it. "How far along?" Cora asked. 14 weeks. She nodded slowly. "The mountain packs?" She said it like a direction rather than an observation. "If you're going further, and I think you are, that's your best option. The deep packs don't answer to the Northern Confederacy's court administration. They govern themselves under old charter law. No one from Thornkeep can compel them to hand over a person." "I know," Celine said. "I've been thinking about Blackmore territory." Cora's expression shifted slightly. Not alarm, more like recalibration. "Blackmore's alpha is Rowan. He's—" She paused. "Particular. He doesn't take in strays for charity." "I'm not asking for charity." Celine set down the cup. "I'm asking for territory. I have skills that would be useful to an independent mountain pack. I know how court administration functions. I know how the Confederacy makes decisions and how to work inside and outside that structure. I know who holds real power and who performs it." She looked at the window, at the thin morning light coming through it. "And I will work." "And the child?" Cora asked. Celine's hand moved, briefly, to her abdomen. "The child will be raised where he can grow up without being used as a political tool by people who would destroy him to get to something else." She pulled her hand back. "That's the minimum condition. Everything else is negotiable." Cora was quiet for a moment. "There's a trader who passes through here every 2 weeks," she said finally. "He runs goods up into the mountain passes. He knows the Blackmore approach routes." She looked at Celine steadily. "He'll be here in 4 days." 4 days. "All right," Celine said. She spent those 4 days in Cora's house, resting and eating and thinking with the focused, patient intensity of someone organizing a campaign rather than nursing a wound. She wrote nothing down. She didn't trust paper. But she arranged things in her mind with the precision of someone laying out a map. What she knew about Blackmore's territory, what she knew about Alpha Rowan from secondhand reports at court, what she would need to establish as her position and her value in the first conversation she had with him, before he had time to form a fixed opinion of her based on whatever he already knew or had heard. She thought about Thornkeep as rarely as she could manage. When it came up unbidden, she let it sit for a moment and then moved it aside. Not suppression. She had learned enough about herself to know that suppression was alone against future collapse. This was more like triage. That is not the problem I'm solving right now. I will solve it when it belongs to the present. On the second night, when the house was quiet and dark, She let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly 1 hour. She thought about the throne room, about Kaelin's face doing that complicated thing she couldn't read before it locked down, about Mira's red eyes and quick hands, about the carved wolf on the windowsill that she had left behind on purpose, because if she had picked it up, she would not have walked out of that room with her spine straight. She felt the grief, which was enormous and specific, and not at all the generic hurt of betrayal, but the very particular ache of watching a person choose wrong when they had everything they needed to choose right. Then she set it down. On the fourth morning, the traitor arrived. His name was Baron. He was a lean, weathered man of indeterminate middle age who drove a mule cart loaded with sealed crates and seemed to regard speech as a resource to be rationed carefully. He looked at Celine for a long moment when Cora introduced them and then said, "I go up as far as the Split Rock Pass. After that, you're on your own for the last 8 miles. How's the footing?" "Cold, steep in 3 places. There's a waymarker at the second steep section with a Blackmore clan mark on it. You stay on the waymarker route after Split Rock. You'll hit their perimeter patrol before dark if you leave early." "And the patrol?" "Don't run," he said. "Don't reach for anything. They'll speak first. You let them speak." "All right," she said. He looked at her a moment longer. "You're the Luna they exiled." It wasn't a question either. "I'm a woman who needs passage to Blackmore territory," she said. "That's all the description that matters." He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he looked away. "Leave at first light." She rode in the back of the cart among the sealed crates, while the mule picked its way up the mountain trail in the thin morning cold. The trail got narrow and then narrower still, and the trees closed in on both sides with the dense silence of high-altitude forest, the kind of quiet that wasn't absence of sound so much as presence of something that didn't use sound. At Split Rock, a place where a massive granite formation had split centuries ago into 2 vertical faces, creating a natural gateway, Baron stopped the cart. "There," he said. He pointed up the trail to where a carved marker post stood at the base of the first steep section, a symbol burned into the wood that she recognized from Confederacy cartography documents, the Blackmore clan mark, 3 parallel lines with a diagonal across them. She climbed down from the cart. The cold hit immediately, sharper up here, with a wind behind it that came off the peaks with genuine menace. "The child," Baron said, still not looking at her. He was adjusting one of the mule's harness straps. "When it's born. Blackmore's a good place for a child." "I know," she said. "Rowan's hard, but he's honest." He finished with the strap. "Harder to find than you'd think." She pulled her pack up onto her shoulders and started up the trail. The waymarkers came at regular intervals after that, each one bearing the same Blackmore mark, pulling her up through terrain that got steeper and more demanding with every half mile. She found a rhythm in it, the rhythm of effort sustained over time, the particular kind of endurance that was less about strength than about the decision to keep making the next step regardless of how the previous one felt. The child was still. She was 2 miles above Split Rock, on a section of trail that cut across a bare granite face with a long fall to the left, when she heard the sound of movement ahead. She stopped. 3 figures came around the curve in the trail. Mountain pack wolves, dressed for high-altitude winter work, armed and moving with the specific ease of people operating in terrain they knew as well as their own skin. They stopped when they saw her. The lead figure, a woman, she registered, solid and sharp-eyed and carrying a short-hafted spear with comfortable familiarity, looked at her for a long moment. "You're not Baron," the woman said. "No, he brought me to Split Rock." Celine kept her hands visible, loose at her sides. "I'm looking to speak with Alpha Rowan Blackmore." "About what?" "About territory. About what I can offer in exchange for shelter." She met the woman's eyes steadily. "About the fact that I'm 14 weeks pregnant and I've been walking for 5 days, and I don't intend to beg anyone for anything, but I am willing to make a fair case to someone with the authority to hear it." The woman studied her. Her gaze dropped briefly to the pack on Celine's back, the wear on her boots, the particular quality of her posture. Not defeated, not performing anything, just standing in the cold and telling the truth as far as it went. "Thornkeep exile," the woman said. Yes, the Luna they stripped, the Luna they lied about. The distinction came out clean and flat, not defensive. There's a difference. The woman looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then she tilted her head toward the trail. Walk in the middle. Don't move faster or slower than we do. Celine fell into position. They moved up the trail and around the granite curve, and the Blackmoor territory opened below them. A valley she could see from the high point of the pass. A series of structures built into the landscape with the practical intelligence of people who had been living at altitude for generations. Smoke from chimneys threading up into the cold sky. The sound of activity carrying up the mountain in clear, high-altitude air. She looked at it for a moment and felt something she hadn't felt in 6 days. Not safety, something smaller than that. The specific sensation of a destination finally reached, after long enough that the reaching of it becomes its own kind of answer. Then the patrol lead turned and said something in a low voice to her companion, and both of them shifted their weight, and Celine registered, too late, that there was a sound behind her now. Not just the 3 ahead. She started to turn. The strike came from the left. A hard impact at the back of her knees. Not violent, but deliberate, precisely enough to fold her legs, and hands caught her under the arms before she hit the ground. When she was upright again, held but not harmed, she was surrounded by 6 mountain wolves instead of 3, and the patrol lead was looking at her with an entirely different expression than she'd had before. The Crown sent a search party this morning, the patrol lead said, her voice stripped of the almost warmth it had held a moment ago. 3 riders. They're 1 pass west of here. They've been asking the ridgeline settlements whether anyone's seen a pregnant woman traveling east. Celine's mind moved fast. Kaelin had sent searchers, or Vespera had, using Kaelin's authority. Either way, it meant she hadn't been allowed to simply disappear into the northern exile as intended, either because someone at court wanted to make sure the exile was permanent in a different way, or because someone at court had changed their mind about the terms and wanted her found. Either possibility was dangerous in different ways. What did the ridgeline settlements tell them? She asked. Harrow's Crossing said they hadn't seen anyone. Cora. She felt a brief, fierce gratitude. So the search party doesn't know where I am, she said. Not yet. The patrol lead's eyes were level and assessing. But if they're 1 pass west and they're asking systematic questions, they'll reach our western perimeter in about 2 days. 2 days. Then I need to speak with Alpha Rowan before they get here, Celine said. And I need that conversation to end with a decision, not a delay. The patrol lead looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something to the figures holding Celine, and the hands released her. Walk, the lead said. Baktit. They brought her to the main hall of the Blackmoor settlement, a long, low building built against the mountain face itself, using the rock as one wall, with a roof of heavy-cut timber that looked like it had been placed by people who expected it to hold the weight of serious weather. Inside, it was warmer than she'd expected. The fire was a working fire, not decorative, and the space was organized around function rather than impression. Tables with work spread across them, gear hung and sorted, food in various stages of preparation on the far side. A real place, not a performance of one. There was a man at the far table. He was younger than she'd pictured from the reports, mid-30s at most, with the lean and particular kind of muscle that came from mountain work rather than combat training. He looked like a person who carried heavy things regularly rather than someone who had trained to look imposing. Dark hair, rough cut, a face with strong bones and a scar along the left jaw that was old enough to be faded. He was looking at a map when she came in, and he didn't look up immediately. Alpha Rowan, the patrol lead said. We found her on the Waymarker trail. He looked up. His eyes were direct in the way that people's eyes were when they had stopped caring about the impression they were making. Not rude, not performing indifference, just the particular steadiness of someone who had decided that what they actually saw was more useful than what they performed seeing. He looked at her for a long moment. The exile, he said. The wrongly accused Luna, she said. But yes, if we're going by what the Confederacy's official record says, exile. He set down his stylus. Word got here 2 days ago. Thornkeep's Alpha King stripped his Luna of title and rank on charges of bloodline betrayal and sent her north. He sent me north. I went southeast. The corner of Rowan's mouth moved, almost not visibly. Smarter. Marginally. Why Blackmore? Because you're outside Confederacy jurisdiction under old charter law. Because you're far enough from Thornkeep that an immediate enforcement action would be politically costly. And because the reports I've heard suggest you make decisions based on actual information rather than political pressure. She kept her voice level. I'm not certain about that last one, but I was willing to bet 8 miles of mountain trail on it. He looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he said, Crown search party. 1 pass west. 2 days out, maybe less. Yes, I know. So this conversation has a deadline. Yes. She met his eyes. I'm aware. Rowan leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and looked at her with the particular quality of attention that was actually attention. Not the performed consideration of someone buying time, but genuine assessment, the kind that came from a person deciding something they intended to honor. Sit down, he said. Tell me what you can do. She sat. She began to talk. And outside the hall, on the mountain pass 1 ridge west of the Blackmore settlement, the sound of horses' hooves on frozen ground was getting closer. The fire in the main hall threw long shadows across the map table, and Celine talked. She had spent 3 years at court learning that the most dangerous moment in any negotiation was the first 2 minutes, not because of what was said, but because of what was decided before either party admitted they were negotiating. Rowan Blackmore had not moved since she sat down. He had not offered food or water, had not gestured for his patrol lead to leave, had not performed any of the small social accommodations that leaders used when they wanted to appear generous before they asked for something. He was watching her the way a person watched terrain they were about to cross, mapping it, measuring it, looking for the places that would hold weight and the places that would give. She respected that. She matched it. Court administration, she said, specifically how the Confederacy allocates resource claims across multi-pact territory. You're operating under old charter law, which exempts you from direct taxation, but you're not exempt from the trade corridor assessments that the Confederacy started issuing 8 years ago as a workaround. You're paying them or you're refusing them, and if you're refusing them, there's a running dispute in the Eastern Ledger at Thornkeep that someone is going to use against you eventually. Rowan's expression didn't change. Go on. I know how those disputes get resolved. I know which administrators hold the actual authority and which ones are fronting for someone else. I know which grievances the Eastern Ledger will negotiate privately and which ones they'll escalate publicly as a pressure tool. And I know how to draft correspondence that moves things without triggering the escalation threshold. She paused. That's one thing I can do. There are others. You've been here 4 minutes, he said. You haven't asked for anything yet. I'm establishing value first. I noticed. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked at her with the particular directness of someone who had decided that they were done waiting to be impressed. The search party. What do they want? I don't know with certainty. 2 possibilities. Either someone at court wants to confirm I've gone north into the wastes as ordered. Confirm it, not find me. In which case they're looking for a trail or evidence of passage. Or someone wants me found and returned, which means the exile order has been modified or someone is acting outside the original order's scope. Which someone? If it's Vespera Vale working through Kalen's authority, she wants to know where I am so she can assess the threat I represent. If it's Kalen himself, she stopped. Let the air hold that for a moment. If it's Kalen, I don't know what he wants. He made his choice in that throne room. I don't have information past that point. Does it matter which? It matters tactically. Vespera will send competent people who will look for intelligent signs of passage. Kalen will send people who are loyal and motivated and will look harder and longer than competence alone requires. She held Rowan's gaze. So yes, it matters. He was quiet for a moment. Behind him, the patrol lead, whose name Celine still didn't know, was standing with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who had watched a lot of people make their case in this room and was not yet sold. You said shelter, Rowan said, yet you didn't say permanent. I said territory. I want a place to stay until the child is born and until I've had enough time to build something that doesn't depend on someone else's goodwill for its foundation. She kept her voice flat and practical. the way she would have delivered a resource assessment at court. How long that takes depends on how useful I am and how much your pack needs what I can offer. And if I say no, then I leave before the search party reaches your perimeter so I don't bring Thornkeep's attention down on your territory without your consent. She pushed back her chair and put her hands flat on the table. I want to be clear about something, Alpha Rowan. I'm not here because I have no options. I'm here because this option makes the most sense. If it doesn't make sense to you, I'll find the next one. The patrol lead made a short sound, but not quite a laugh, more like the compressed version of one. Rowan looked at his patrol lead. Something passed between them, fast and wordless, the kind of communication that only existed between people who had worked in close proximity long enough to have built a second language out of small signals. He looked back at Celine. "Lisa," he said to the patrol lead, "take 2 people. Hit the western ridge before full dark and find out where the Crown Riders are and what they're actually doing." The patrol lead, Lisa, uncrossed her arms and left without a word. Rowan stood up from the table. He was taller than she'd registered when he was sitting. Not Kaylin's height, but close. He moved around the table and stopped about 6 feet from her, in the open space between the table and the fire, and looked at her with the direct assessment she was already starting to think of as his default mode. "You didn't beg," he said. "No." Most people who come here asking for something beg. At least a little. It's, he searched for the word, instinctive. "I know what begging costs," she said. "It costs you the negotiation before it starts. The other party spends the rest of the conversation thinking about what you'll accept when you're desperate, not what you're worth when you're not." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're hungry." She blinked. It was such a practical pivot that it took her half a second to track it. "Yes." "Sit down," he said again. He crossed to the far end of the hall where the food stores were and came back with bread and dried meat and a clay cup of something that turned out to be warm broth. He set it in front of her without ceremony and went back to his map. She ate. She didn't rush it, and she didn't perform gratitude, just ate steadily and let the heat of the broth work through the cold that had been living in her chest for 6 days. Across the table, Rowan worked on his map in silence, making notations in a cramped shorthand that she couldn't read from her angle. When she finished, she said, "The child moves at night mostly, in case that's relevant to how you're thinking about the space question." He looked up. For the first time, something shifted in his face that wasn't pure assessment, something more complicated, more human. "How far along?" 14 weeks when I left Thornkeep. 15 now, roughly. He looked back at the map. "There's a room at the end of the east corridor. It's used for storage in winter. We can clear it." She didn't say thank you. She said, "I'll need access to your correspondence ledger when I start working. And I'll need to know what the actual state of the Eastern trade dispute is. Not the summary version, the full record." "You'll get it," he said. "But..." Lisa came back 2 hours before midnight. She came in fast and cold, snow on her shoulders that hadn't been there when she left, which meant the weather on the ridge had turned. She pulled off her outer layer and hung it without stopping and crossed directly to where Rowan and Celine were still at the map table. Celine had not left, had spent the 2 hours working through the Eastern ledger documents that a young pack member named Corvine had retrieved from the records room without being told why. 3 riders, Lisa said. She pulled up a chair, reversed it, sat with her forearms across the back. "Crown seal on their gear. They're not from the regular garrison. They're court riders, the kind the Alpha King sends for specific assignments. They're moving slow, and they're asking detailed questions, not just landmarks." "Looking for signs of passage," Celine said. "Looking for signs of you specifically." Lisa looked at her directly, no softening in it. "They have a description. They know about the pregnancy. They know you went southeast instead of north." The room was very quiet. "Who told them southeast?" Rowan asked. "Baron," Celine said, before Lisa could answer. Not bitterly. It was just the likely answer. Baron was a trader who moved through Confederacy-controlled territory. A crown rider asking the right questions with the right authority could make his routes very difficult without a cooperative answer. Or someone at Harrow's Crossing. Not Cora. But there are 11 buildings there. Rowan looked at Lisa. "Did they ask about us?" "Not directly. but they're systematic. They'll reach the western perimeter settlements by tomorrow morning, and someone will mention the Waymarker Trail. The Waymarker Trail that led directly to this hall. Celine pushed the ledger document she'd been reading to one side and looked at the map in front of her. Her eyes moved across it with the speed of someone who had spent years reading political cartography, territory boundaries, resource markers, the particular symbols Blackmore used for patrol routes and seasonal access points. "Here," she said, and put her finger on a point about 4 miles northwest of the settlement's main cluster. "What's this?" Rowan leaned over. "Old mining camp. Hasn't been used in 12 years. The access trail washed out in a spring flood." "Is it structurally intact?" "Mostly. We use it for emergency weather shelter. There's a stove, basic supplies." "If I'm not here when the riders reach your perimeter," Celine said, "they have nothing. They can ask their questions, and you can tell them truthfully that there's no Luna Ashwin in Blackmore territory. You haven't seen her. No record of her presence." She pulled her hand back from the map. "I stay at the mining camp until they've passed through and moved on. 3 days, maybe 4. Then I come back." Rowan looked at the map point, then at her. "The weather on the northwest ridge in winter. I've been walking for 6 days in mountain cold. I can manage 3 more. You're 15 weeks pregnant." "I'm aware." Her voice didn't rise. "Which is why I'm not suggesting something I don't think I can do." "The stove works," you said. "There are supplies. If Lysa can have someone show me the access route tonight, I can be there before the riders reach your western settlements." Lisa was watching this exchange with the same watchful quality she'd had since the beginning, the look of someone running a long evaluation. "I'll take you myself," Lysa said. Celine looked at her. There was something in the offer that was more than logistics, a test maybe, or the beginning of a different kind of assessment than Rowan's. Fine. She would take the tests as they came. "All right," she said. They left an hour before midnight. Lisa moved through mountain terrain the way that people moved when the mountain had been their whole life. Not carefully, not cautiously, but with an intimate ease, placing feet with the automatic precision of someone for whom the rock and the grade and the unpredictable ice patches were as legible as text. Celine kept pace. She had to work harder for it, the pack on her back redistributed to account for her shifting center of gravity, her body making constant small calculations that her conscious mind had learned to trust and leave alone. They didn't talk for the first mile. Then Lysa said, without slowing, "You know he could have said no." "Yes, he almost did. I know that too." A pause. The wind was picking up on the exposed sections of the trail coming in from the north with a thin, mean edge to it. What changed his mind? Celine thought about it honestly. "I didn't perform weakness," she said. "And I didn't perform strength either. He's dealt with enough of both to recognize the performance." She stepped over a root that crossed the trail. "I just told him what I could do, and I meant it." Lysa was quiet for a stretch. "He's been running this pack for 9 years. He took it at 26 when his father died. Took it badly. 3 council members tried to split the territory. 2 outside packs made border claims within the first year. Half the settlement wanted to align with the Confederacy because it looked safer." She said all of this in the same tone she might use to describe weather conditions. "He dealt with all of it and kept the charter." "I know," Celine said. "That's why I came here. He doesn't need another person to manage." "I'm not asking to be managed." The trail turned sharply upward and she adjusted her stride. "I'm asking to work. There's a difference." Another long quiet. The mining camp trail was rougher than the main Waymarker route, unmarked, maintained only by occasional use, the kind of path that required active attention to follow. Lisa navigated it without hesitation, and Celine tracked her lead with the focused presence of someone for whom getting lost right now was not an acceptable outcome. "The baby's father," Lysa said. Not gently, not cruelly, just the question, put down in the dark the way you put down a tool you intended to pick back up. "Kaelin Thornhart." Celine said it without inflection. Whatever the bloodwork assessment said, whatever testimony Vespera Vale manufactured, Kaelin Thornhart is the father. The child is the heir to the Thornhart crown. Which makes him valuable. Which makes him a target, Celine said. If the wrong people know he exists, which is why no one outside of the people in this conversation needs to know who he is. Lisa stopped walking. Celine stopped too. They were on a flat section of the trail, a natural shelf of rock, and the settlement lights were invisible now. They had crested into a fold of the mountain that blocked the view back down. Above them, the sky was a hard, clear black with the kind of stars that only appeared at altitude, sharp and close and impersonal. Lisa turned and looked at her. "If Thornkeep finds out there's an heir up here," she said, "they don't send 3 court riders." "No," Celine said, "they don't." "So you're asking us to hold a secret that could bring a crown army to our territory." "I'm asking you to hold a secret that, if it stays secret long enough, becomes irrelevant to Thornkeep's court structure." Celine held Lysa's gaze. If Vespera Vale gets what she's moving toward, if she bonds with Kaelin within the 2-year window the Confederacy law requires, then Lucian stops being an heir problem and becomes a historical footnote, a child born outside the recognized bond, stripped of succession claim by the dissolution. He becomes just a child. And if she doesn't, then we deal with that when it becomes the actual problem, not before. Lysa looked at her for a long moment. Her face in the dark was hard to read. The starlight was precise but flat, stripping out the subtleties of expression. What Celine could see was the steadiness of it. No alarm, no anger, just the working through of someone who made real decisions and understood what real decisions cost. "All right," Lisa said. She turned back to the trail. "Come on, the camp's another mile." The mining camp was exactly what Rowan had described. A low structure built against a rock face, weathered to near invisibility in the landscape, with a stove that worked and a stack of dry wood beside it, and supplies laid out in the particular efficient order of people who thought about emergency use. Lisa started the stove, checked the roof for winter damage, assessed the single sleeping area with the critical eye of someone who had slept in worse and was calibrating against a specific standard of survivable. 3 days, Lisa said. Maybe 4. We'll have someone come up when the riders clear our territory. All right. The stove. Don't let it go out overnight. Temperature on this face drops faster than the settlement. I know how to keep a fire. A brief pause. No doubt. Lysa picked up her outer layer, which she'd set by the door. There's a signal. A notched stick on the trail post outside. If it's oriented east, we're clear. West means stay. I'll check it at dawn. Lysa started for the door. Then she stopped. Rowan, she said without turning around. He's not going to tell you this, so I will. He had a child. A daughter, 7 years ago. The words came out even, measured, neither soft nor hard. Her mother died in the 2nd winter. The child didn't survive the 3rd. She paused. He doesn't do things from charity. He does them from logic, but sometimes the logic and the other thing are pointing in the same direction. Celine was quiet. Sleep, Lysa said, and left. She kept the stove burning through the night and slept in the way she'd been sleeping since the exile, shallowly, with the part of her that monitored things keeping its watch, cataloging the sounds of the camp and the mountain and the weather against the baseline of safe and not safe. The child moved at some point before dawn, the long, slow roll that meant dreaming, and she put her hand flat on her abdomen in the dark and held it there until he settled. She thought about Vespera, not about what Vespera had done. She had processed that enough to be past the raw part of it, past the part where it felt like a personal outrage, and into the territory where it was simply information to be worked with. She thought about what Vespera would do next. The search party was looking for a trail. If they found evidence that she had reached Blackmore territory, and Rowan denied it, and the evidence was thin enough to be deniable, they would file a report and return to Thornkeep. Vespera would read that report and make a decision. She would decide either that Celine was in Blackmore territory and hidden, which would require a more significant action to confirm or extract, or that Celine had moved past Blackmore and gone further into the deep mountain territories, which would make finding her essentially impossible through conventional means. In either case, Vespera would be calculating risk. Was Celine, In exile and pregnant and without political standing, enough of a threat to justify the political cost of sending a crown force into old charter territory? Against a ruling alpha who had held his charter through 9 years of active challenges? The answer was probably no. Not now. Not while the exile was fresh enough that forcing the issue would look like persecution rather than law enforcement, but that window would close. When the child was born and grew and became visible, when he stopped being a hypothetical heir and became a specific boy with Thornheart features that people could see and recognize, the calculus would change. She had time. Not as much as she wanted, but time. She would use it. Jeez. On the second day, she organized the camp supplies and drafted, in her head, the complete argument she intended to make about Blackmore's Eastern trade dispute. By the third morning, when she checked the trail marker and found the notched stick oriented east, she had the outline of a letter that she believed could close the dispute without triggering escalation and without Rowan having to give up a single additional resource unit. She came down off the mountain with the specific purposeful stride of someone who had decided where they were going. Corvin met her at the edge of the settlement with dry firewood in his arms and the slightly awkward expression of a young man who had not been told exactly what to say. He was maybe 19 with the mountain pack's particular quality of physicality. Compact, sure-footed, built for endurance rather than show. "Alpha Rowan's in the hall," he said. "I know," she said, and walked past him. Rowan was at the map table again, with Lysa and 2 people she hadn't met yet. He looked up when she came in. His expression did not perform surprise or relief, just acknowledged her arrival and waited. "The riders?" she asked. "Left our western territory yesterday afternoon," Lysa said. "They'll report back to Thornkeep that there's no evidence of passage through Blackmore." Good. She pulled off her outer layer and hung it, crossed to the table, looked at the map, then at Rowan. "I have an approach for the Eastern Ledger dispute. I want to present it to whoever's been managing that file and get the full documentation before I finalize it." Rowan looked at her for a moment with the map between them and the fire at her back, and Lysa watching from the side. "Corvin handles the administrative correspondence," he said. "I'll need him for 2 hours this afternoon." "He's yours." He paused. "The room at the end of the east corridor is cleared." She nodded. She turned to go. Then something made her stop. Not a sound, not a specific change in the room, just a shift in the quality of the air that had been behind her the last 3 days, and that her body had learned to track whether she wanted it to or not. "Celine." Rowan's voice was quiet. She turned back. He was looking at the map, not at her, and there was something in his posture that was slightly different from his normal absolute stillness, a constraint in the shoulders, a deliberate quality to the way he held himself that meant he was choosing his words with more care than usual. "When the child is born, he'll need to be registered somewhere. The old charter has a provision for birth records outside Confederacy jurisdiction, non-traceable." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you because you should know it exists before you need it, not because I'm making you a promise." "I understand the difference," she said. He nodded once, went back to the map. She went to find Corvin and the Eastern Ledger files. But the months moved the way mountain seasons moved, not gently, but with their own logic, each one harder than the one that preceded it, and each one teaching her something that the previous one hadn't. She worked. She built a correspondence practice for the Blackmore administration that operated on 3 levels: the formal Confederacy-facing channel, the informal back channel she opened with 2 administrators at the Eastern Ledger who responded to the right kind of careful language, and a 3rd channel of information that she cultivated through the trader network that passed through Harrow's Crossing. Cora's settlement became a quiet relay point. Baron, who had almost certainly given the Crown Riders her direction under pressure, came back around 4 months later with a delivery and didn't quite meet her eyes, and left a small wrapped package with the goods that turned out to contain a note in Cora's handwriting that said simply, "The riders haven't been back." She took that as forgiveness offered and accepted it. The Eastern trade dispute resolved in the 5th month. Not dramatically. No confrontation adjacent negotiation. Just a letter sent to the right administrator at the right moment making an argument framed in the specific bureaucratic register that the Eastern Ledger responded to, And 3 weeks later, a return letter acknowledging a reclassification of Blackmore's corridor access that effectively ended the assessment obligation. Rowan read the return letter twice. Then he looked at her across the table and said, "How?" The administrator who held the actual authority on that file was appointed 7 years ago by a council faction that since lost its standing, she said. He's been managing a file that his current political allies have no interest in. Resolving it quietly was worth more to him than holding the position. Rowan absorbed this. You knew that before you wrote the letter. I knew it before I read the file. Another long look, then, what else do you know that we haven't asked about yet? She thought about it seriously, not rhetorically. The eastern border pressure that Kaelin's been managing. The military unrest the Confederacy attributed to rogue pack factions last season. That's not rogue factions. She paused. There's a coordinated effort coming from inside the Confederacy's own administrative structure. 3 of the Eastern Council seats are working against Crown policy, not with it. Someone has been funding the unrest deliberately to destabilize Thornkeep's authority over the border territories. He went very still. Vespera Vale's coalition, she said. The Southern Lowland Pacts. They're not waiting for her bond to Kaelin to move their resources north. They're already moving them. Rowan sat back. How certain are you? Certain enough that I'd stake something on it. She kept her voice even. I've been reading the trader reports for 5 months. The supply patterns. Which settlements are receiving goods they didn't order through normal channels? Which Eastern Pack settlements have had new construction started in the last 2 seasons that doesn't match their population growth? She paused. Someone is building infrastructure quietly and fast. You build that kind of infrastructure when you expect to need it, and you don't want anyone to notice until it's too late to matter. The room was very quiet. If Vespera gets Thornkeep through Kaelin's bond, Celine said, and she already controls the Eastern supply infrastructure, she doesn't need the Confederacy's formal approval for anything. She'll have the resources to operate outside it, and outside the Confederacy's structure means outside the charter protections that keep territories like this one independent. Rowan was looking at her with an expression that was sharper than his usual assessment, something behind his eyes that she recognized. The particular quality of attention that happened when a person's understanding of their situation shifted from what they thought it was to what it actually was. You've known this for a while, he said. I've been building towards certainty, she said. I wasn't going to present it until I was sure enough to stand behind it. And now you're sure. Sure enough. He stood up from the table. He moved to the fire and stood with his back to it for a moment, looking at the map on the table from a distance. His hands were at his sides, loose, but his jaw was set with the specific tension of someone working through very large implications. If this is accurate, he said, then the threat isn't to Thornkeep alone. No, she said. It's to every independent charter territory in the Northern Range. If the Confederacy's structure is compromised at the Eastern Council level, and the Southern Coalition has the resources to operate outside it, then the old charters become irrelevant. Not because they're revoked, because the enforcement mechanism that makes them meaningful stops functioning. He turned around and looked at her. Your son, he said. The shift was so direct that she felt it physically. A contraction, something between a flinch and a steel response, gone before it fully formed. She kept her face steady. What about him? He's the legitimate heir to the Thornheart crown, the only legal claim that could override a new bond and a new succession arrangement. He said it with the flatness of a man stating geography, which means he's not just your child. He's the only existing piece that could stop what you're describing from consolidating permanently. The fire cracked behind him. Outside, the wind was doing what it did at this altitude in the 9th month of her pregnancy in the second deep cold of a mountain winter. Celine looked at Rowan Blackmore across the map table and understood, in the full and undecorated way she had been avoiding letting herself understand it, that her son had been in danger before he was born. Not from Vespera's ambition alone, not from Kaelin's choice in that throne room alone, from the weight of what he was, what he carried in his blood without having chosen it, the specific gravity of being the one piece that could change an entire board. She had known it. She had been building toward knowing it for months, the way you built toward a conclusion you didn't want to reach by examining everything around it first. He's a child, she said. Her voice was steady. He is going to be a child first. He is going to have the chance to be a child, in a safe place, before he is anything else. Celine, I'm not arguing against the reality of what he is, she said. I'm telling you the order. Child first. Everything else after. Rowan held her gaze. A long moment. Then something in his expression moved. Not softened, nothing that clean, but shifted into a different register. 3 weeks, he said. Maybe less. Her hand moved to her abdomen without her directing it. The child was still. He had been very still for the past 2 days. Not the listening stillness she'd come to recognize, but a different kind, the gathered quiet of something preparing. I know, she said. And then, in the particular hush that followed, the first contraction hit. Not the preliminary kind, not the long, slow warning that the books described, the real kind, the kind that said, now. Celine put both hands flat on the map table and breathed. Rowan was on his feet before she registered that he'd moved. Lysa, he said, his voice carrying without rising. From somewhere in the hall, Lysa's boots hit the floor. Celine breathed through it, counted, let it pass, and in the space after it, before the next one came, she looked at the map beneath her hands, the spread of mountain territory, the markers and routes, and the particular symbol for Blackmoor's boundaries. And she understood with the specific clarity of someone standing at an absolute threshold that nothing on the other side of the next few hours was going to look like anything that had come before. The second contraction came. Rowan's hand was on her arm, not gripping, just present, a point of contact that was steadying without being restraining. I've got you, he said. She almost told him she didn't need him to have her. Then she decided that was a distinction that could wait. Get Lysa, she said instead. And that's enough people in the room. I mean it, just Lysa. He nodded. And for a moment, in the hard firelight of the Blackmoor Hall, with the mountain winter pressing against the walls and her son about to enter the world in a place that was not supposed to be her home but had become the closest thing to it, Celine Ashwin let herself grip the edge of the table hard enough to whiten her knuckles, and breathed and held. The child who would change everything was coming. And 3 days' ride west, in the court of a kingdom quietly falling apart at its foundations, no one yet knew he existed. Lucian came into the world at 4 a.m, in the coldest hour, the one that had no mercy in it. Lisa caught him. Celine heard her own voice doing things she had not planned for and could not control, and somewhere underneath the physical extremity of it she registered, with the distant clarity of someone watching their own life from a slight remove, that this was the only moment she had ever experienced that was genuinely beyond her management. Everything else, the throne room, the exile, the mountain crossing, the 5 days of walking, had been survivable through the exercise of will and intelligence applied in sequence. This was different. This was her body operating on its own authority, and all she could do was stay inside it and not fight what it was doing. Then it was over. Lisa put him on her chest, and he was warm and shockingly real, heavier than she had imagined, already moving his mouth against her skin with the blind, determined searching of something that had arrived with a complete agenda. She put her hand on the back of his head, the skull still soft, the hair dark and damp, and held him and breathed. Lisa was doing something efficient at the foot of the bed. Celine heard the door open and Rowan's voice ask a question, and Lysa give a short answer and the door close again. The child made a sound. Not a cry, more like a statement, low and indignant, as though announcing arrival to an audience he was already somewhat critical of. Lucian, she said quietly to the top of his head. She had known his name for months. She had not said it aloud until now. Doubt. He was 3 weeks old when Kaylin's scout reached the Blackmoor western perimeter. She was in the correspondence room, a converted storage space off the main hall that had become hers across the months of working, walls lined with the ledger files and letter copies she'd been building into a complete intelligence picture of the Confederacy's eastern administrative situation. When Corvin knocked and came in with the particular expression that meant something had happened that he didn't know how to rank. A man came to the western settlement, Corvin said. Not crown riders. One person, alone, no crown seal on his gear. He's asking for Alpha Rowan by name. He paused. He said to tell him it's about the Luna from Thornkeep. She was on her feet before Corvin finished the sentence. But the man's name was Oren. He was in his 50s, weathered and road thin, with the particular quality of someone who had been traveling hard for a long stretch and hadn't stopped to eat enough. He sat at Rowan's table with his hands wrapped around a cup of broth and looked at Celine when she came in with an expression that moved through several things quickly before it settled on something she could only read as relief. "You're alive," he said. "Who sent you?" she said. "No one sent me." He set the cup down. "I came because I know what's happening at court, and I couldn't send a letter through any channel that isn't compromised." He looked at Rowan briefly, then back to her. "My name probably doesn't mean anything to you. I worked in the court seal office for 18 years. I processed correspondence, all of it." She sat down across from him. "You processed Vespera Vale's fabricated correspondence," she said. He went very still. "Yes." "And you didn't speak then?" The words came out flat, not accusatory. She genuinely wanted the information, not the confession. But she watched it land on him, watched his face do the complicated thing that happened when a person had spent a long time with a guilt that had worn itself into the shape of the question they kept asking themselves. "No," he said, "I didn't speak then." He picked the cup back up and put it down again without drinking. "I told myself I didn't know enough, that what I'd processed could have innocent explanations, that it wasn't my place." He looked at her. "I knew. I just knew the cost of saying it, and I decided the cost was too high. And now? Now the cost of not saying it is higher." He spread his hands on the table. 2 months ago, Vespera Vale formalized her bond petition under the 2-year dissolution law. Kaylin refused it. The room's temperature seemed to change. Celine kept her face exactly where it was. "He refused it," she said. "Refused it. Dismissed 3 of her coalition's advisory appointments and started an internal investigation into the Eastern Council seats." Oren's voice had an urgency in it now, barely contained. "He found things. Not everything you know, I think, but enough. Enough to understand that the exile was engineered. He has been looking for you for 4 months." Rowan, who had been standing with his arms crossed near the wall, shifted his weight. Celine was quiet. She was thinking about Mira, in the room that last morning, with red eyes and quick hands. He knows. She had filed that away, had carried it across mountains and months, had kept it in the category of information that belonged to a later she hadn't reached yet. She was reaching it now, and it felt nothing like she had expected. "He's been looking for 4 months," she said. "He knew I went southeast. His riders were here 6 months ago." "The riders were Vespera's," Oren said. "She issued the search order under his seal before he understood what she was doing. By the time he knew they'd been sent and where, they were already back." He leaned forward. "She's been operating inside his authority for 2 years. Seal access, council appointments, correspondence routing. He's been pulling it apart piece by piece for the past 4 months, and every piece he finds makes it worse." "What does he want?" Celine said. "To find you. To—" Oren stopped, chose the next word carefully. "To answer for what happened." That's how he said it. To answer for it. The fire was the loudest thing in the room for a moment. She looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, the ring left by Oren's cup, the ordinary physical specificity of the surface. She had built something here, not comfort, exactly. Something more structural than comfort. A position. A practice. A child sleeping down the east corridor with Lysa checking him every hour with the particular ferocity of someone who had decided, without ever saying so, that the child was also hers to protect. She had built it on the assumption that Thornkeep was what it had been when she left it. "Is he coming here?" Rowan asked. His voice was quiet and entirely level. "He intends to," Oren said. "I left before he finalized the route. He's bringing a small party. Not an armed force, not crown riders. 6 people. People he trusts personally." "Who does he trust personally?" Celine said. "After 2 years of discovering how compromised his court is." "Troyes." Oren looked at her. "That's the question I kept asking myself on the way here. She went to Lucian after Oren was settled, and Rowan had posted people on the western approach route with instructions to report not to stop. She sat on the edge of the low bed in the room at the end of the east corridor and looked at her son sleeping in the wooden crib that Corvin had built over 3 evenings with the focused, awkward care of someone who had never built a crib before and intended to get it right. Lucian slept with his hands up near his face, fists loosely curled. He had Kaylin's jaw. She had known it would come, and it had come anyway. The specific architecture of his bone structure announcing its inheritance in the first week and becoming only more legible since. The rest was hers, or was becoming hers, or was something entirely its own that she hadn't yet found the right reference for. She looked at him and thought about Kaylin arriving at Blackmore. She thought about what it meant that he had refused Vespera's bond petition. That was not a tactical choice. Refusing the petition under the 2-year law created a legal instability in his authority that his enemies would exploit immediately. He had done it knowing that. Had done it and started digging up what Vespera had buried anyway, at the cost of exactly the kind of political ground under his feet that he had chosen over her in the throne room. She didn't know what to do with that. She had spent 6 months being done with it. Not healed from it, but past the part where she spent her hours in the raw work of surviving it. She had moved it into the past tense, made it part of the structure of things rather than the bleeding edge. And now it was arriving at the western approach route with 6 people Kaylin trusted personally, and she had to find somewhere to put it that wasn't the raw work again. Lucian made a small sound in his sleep, adjusted his fists. She didn't know what she owed Kaylin. She didn't know what he owed her. She knew what had happened, and she knew what it had cost, and she knew she had built something here that was real and that she would not sacrifice the substance of it for the appearance of resolution. She was still working out what that meant when Lysa appeared in the doorway. "Rowan wants you," Lisa said. Her voice had something in it that Celine had not heard before, a quality of restraint that meant there was something being held back, something that was being kept contained by effort. Celine looked at her. "What happened?" Lisa's jaw tightened. "Come to the hall, Cham." 2 of Rowan's western perimeter people were in the hall when she got there. Neither of them was the composed, matter-of-fact presence they usually were. One had his hand pressed to his side in a way that, when she looked more carefully, resolved into a wound. Not serious, but recent, the kind of injury that came from moving fast through something sharp and not stopping to account for it. Rowan was standing at the map table. His face was its usual unreadable, but his hands were flat on the table, and there was a tension in his frame that she had learned to recognize as his version of extremely controlled alarm. "Talk," she said. "Crown soldiers," the uninjured perimeter watch said. "Not 6, 40, maybe more. Coming through the northern pass, not the western approach route, the northern pass. The one that bypasses the settlements." He paused. "They're already inside our outer perimeter. They moved through the night." She processed this in the space of 3 seconds. Not Kaylin. Kaylin with 6 people he trusted. 40 soldiers through the northern pass at night bypassing the settlements meant an approach designed to avoid reporting and to cut off exit routes. "Vespera," Celine said. "Has to be," Rowan said. "Oren said Kaylin started dismantling her court access 4 months ago. She's been watching him look for you." His eyes moved to hers, flat and direct. "She found you first. The map on the table. The settlement markers. The northern pass coming in above and east. If 40 soldiers were already past the outer perimeter, they were—" "How long?" she said. 2 hours. Maybe less if they pushed the last section." 2 hours. She looked at the map. She looked at Rowan. "Lucien," she said. "Lisa's already with him." Something in her chest, at the name, constricted and released. She put it away. She moved to the map table. "Your people," she said. "Fighters. How many can you put in position in 2 hours?" 30? 35 if I pull the Eastern Watch." "Pulling the Eastern Watch opens the Eastern approach." "I know." "So you can't." She put her finger on the Northern Pass approach. "They'll come down this drainage. It's the only viable route at speed. There's a natural choke point here." She found the marker. "Can you hold a choke point with 30 against 40? Depends how good their 40 are. Crown soldiers on a covert operation through a mountain pass at night are not ceremonial. They'll be good." "So will mine." He straightened. "We've been fighting in this terrain for 9 years. They've been in it for one night. She looked at him. There was something in this moment that she had not prepared for. Not the tactical situation, which her mind was already inside and working, but the specific weight of the fact that the threat to Lucian had arrived the way she had known it eventually would, had arrived before she had anything close to ready, had arrived because someone far away with more resources and a longer plan had been patient in a way that she had not been patient enough to account for. She had thought she had time. She had been building toward having time. "There's another option," Rowan said. His voice was quiet. "You take Lucian and go. East, through the High Trail. I know a settlement 3 days out that's outside any territory claim. They'd take you. And your pack fights 40 crown soldiers for a woman who isn't here anymore." "My pack fights for its own territory. The woman's separate." "It's not separate." She kept her voice down. "Rowan, if Vespera sent 40 soldiers into Old Charter territory to extract an exiled Luna, she's already decided that the charters don't constrain her. If you hold her here and win, you've made her enemy. If I run, she still makes her move on the independent territories eventually. She just does it without the specific irritant of me." She paused. "Running doesn't solve the structural problem. It just moves me out of her way while she solves it herself." He was looking at her with the specific quality of attention that meant he was hearing more than the immediate argument. "The heir," he said. "The heir is 3 weeks old," she said. "He's not the solution to anything yet. The solution is not letting Vespera consolidate while everyone who might contest her is scattered and reactive." "What do you need?" She looked at the map. Her mind was moving through it fast, through the terrain and the positions and the specific logic of what 40 soldiers in a mountain choke point could and couldn't do against people who knew the ground. "I need someone to reach Kaelin," she said. "Orin knows the route he was taking. If he's 3 days out with 6 people, he needs to know what's coming in from behind." She paused. "And I need to know who commanded this unit. Specifically, I need a name." "Why?" "Because if this is an authorized Crown operation, it changes everything. And if it's unauthorized, if Vespera is using Crown soldiers outside Kaelin's knowledge, then the commander of this unit is about to do something that ends his career if the right person knows about it." Rowan looked at her. Something in his face had shifted all the way into a different register, past assessment, past the careful evaluation she had been living under for 6 months. He was looking at her the way that people looked at someone when they stopped seeing what they expected to see and started seeing what was actually there. "You're going to try to turn the commander," he said. "I'm going to try to give him a reason not to follow through on his orders," she said. "There's a difference. And if it doesn't work, then your 30 people hold the choke point and we see what happens." She looked at him steadily. "But I've been reading Thornkeep's military command structure for 6 months. I know who Kaelin trusts for covert operations. I know the 3 names it could be." She put her hand flat on the map. "Let me talk to him first, before your people engage." A very long pause. "Lysa goes with you," Rowan said. "Lysa stays with Lucian." His jaw tightened. "Then Corvin." "Corvin," she said, because that was the shape of a compromise, and she had learned enough about Rowan to know that this was not the moment to fight for the last word. "All right." They met the column where the drainage narrowed. Corvin was beside her, and she had the particular quality of stillness that came from having made a decision and arrived at its implementation. Not calm, nothing that clean, but the absence of wasted motion that came from being entirely committed to the next 60 seconds. The column had stopped. 40 soldiers in mountain cold, trail-tired, and in front of them, alone in the drainage, one woman without armor. The commander pushed through to the front. She had been right about the name. It was Brecht, Kaelin's Northern Operations Specialist, a man she had met twice at court functions and catalogued then as someone who ran on loyalty and precision in equal measure. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Commander Brecht," she said, "I need you to think very carefully about the order you were given and who gave it." His face was controlled. "Luna Ashwin." He didn't strip the title. That was information. "I have orders for your return to Thornkeep." "From whom?" A brief pause. "From the Crown." "Kaelin Thornheart," she said, "is 3 days west of here with 6 people, riding to find me through his own initiative. He does not know you're here." She watched his face, watched the thing that moved through it, carefully controlled, but not perfectly controlled. "The order you're carrying was processed through the crown seal. It has the appearance of royal authority. That's not the same as having royal authority. I verify my orders through the seal office," she said, "which has been compromised for 2 years by a woman who is attempting to seize control of the Confederacy's Eastern Territory structure." She took one step forward, just one. "Brecht, you've worked for Kalen for 11 years. You know him. Does this feel like his operation?" Something moved behind his eyes. 40 soldiers, she said, in old charter territory, at night, against one exiled woman and a 3-week-old child. She let that sit. "Is that Kalen's operation?" The drainage was very quiet, 40 soldiers watching their commander's face. "The child," Brecht said. His voice had changed quality. "There's a child. 3 weeks old, Kalen's son." She did not blink. "The heir you were sent here to prevent from existing." The silence that followed was not the silence of a man thinking. It was the silence of a man who had already thought and was now arriving at the place the thinking had led him, a place he had been hoping the thinking wouldn't take him. "Stand down," Brecht said, quietly, to the column behind him. No one moved for a moment. "Stand down," he said again, harder. The column stood down. Celine breathed. One breath, slow and controlled, the only one she allowed herself. "I need you to write a deposition," she said. "Everything about this order. Who delivered it? Through what channel? Under what authorization? I need it in writing, witnessed, before you leave this territory." She held his gaze. "And then I need you to find Kalen and tell him where his son is." Brecht looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Luna." The title, again, deliberate. She nodded, and then, from somewhere above them in the dark of the drainage, a sound came, wrong and sharp and sudden, the crack of something structural giving way, and before she could locate it, the mountain answered with the deep chest roar of a snow shelf breaking loose from the high rock face above the choke point. Someone in the column shouted. Corvin grabbed her arm. The avalanche came down the left side of the drainage, not the center, not directly on the column, not a full burial, but enough. Enough to move everything. Soldiers scattered, the formation broke, and in the chaos of snow and noise and bodies moving fast in multiple directions, she lost Brecht and lost the drainage orientation, and Corvin was pulling her and she was moving because moving was the only option. When it stopped, she was on the high side of the debris field, Corvin beside her, both breathing hard. Below, the column was dispersed across the drainage, soldiers helping each other out of the snow's edge. Nobody buried, but nobody organized either. She looked for Brecht. He was on the far side of the debris. He looked up and found her across the distance, and his face said something she couldn't read from here, but that wasn't hostility. Then one of his soldiers said something, and Brecht turned, and she saw what the soldier was pointing at. 3 figures coming down the high trail above the drainage, moving fast, mountain-paced, reading the terrain the way Blackmore people read it. Lysa's people, she thought, coming to hold the choke point. But Lysa's people wore mountain pack gear. These figures wore. She looked harder, made her eyes work in the thin dawn light now starting to come above the peaks. Crown colors. Not Vesper's covert column. The lead figure came down the last section of the trail and stopped at the edge of the debris field, and she knew the shape of him before she could see his face. She had known it for 3 years. She had spent 6 months teaching herself not to know it. Kalen. He had not come through the western approach. He had come through the high trail, the same high trail she'd come down with Lysa in the dark, the trail that Baron's route had fed into from the south. He had found the same geography she had, driven by the same need to avoid the obvious approach. 3 days early. He stood at the edge of the debris field, and he looked across it, and he found her. The space between them was 40 feet of churned snow and the entire weight of everything that had happened since a dawn in a throne room where she had told him, "The child is yours. You will remember I said that." He stood very still. She stood very still. And in the low building behind her, 3 weeks old and entirely unaware of the specific gravity, of the moment he had been born into, Lucian Thornheart made the small, indignant sound that she had been hearing every morning since his arrival, announcing himself to the dawn. Kaelin's head turned toward the sound. His face, across the debris field, in the first gray morning light, did something she had never seen it do. It broke. The debris field between them was 40 feet of churned snow and 6 months of silence and everything that had no name yet. Kaelin did not move immediately. He stood at the edge of the avalanche's reach with the dawn light coming in thin and cold above the peaks, and he looked at Celine across the distance, and his face was doing the thing she had seen it do only once before, in the throne room, in the half-second before it locked down. Except this time, it did not lock down. This time it stayed open, and what was in it was not complicated or ambiguous. It was just damage. The specific, undefended look of someone confronting the full dimensions of what they had done. Then his eyes moved to the building behind her, toward the sound. Celine turned. Corvin was already moving back toward the hall's door, the instinct of someone who understood that certain moments required fewer witnesses. She did not stop him. She turned back to Kaelin and watched him cross the debris field. Not fast, not performing urgency, just moving through the snow with the direct, purposeful stride of a man who had been moving toward this point for 4 months and was not going to stop 6 feet short of it. He stopped 6 feet short of her. She looked at him. He looked at her. He looked worse than she had expected. Not physically. He was Kaelin. He was always going to look like something quarried, but in the particular way that told her the past 6 months had not been kind to the inside of him. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there, a quality of exhaustion that lived deeper than sleep deprivation. He looked like a man who had been eating himself from the inside and had gotten considerably far along. "Good," said the part of her that was still raw. "Wait," said the part of her that was trying to think. "You're early," she said. "I pushed the pace." His voice was rough, road-worn. "Orin reached me 2 days ago. He told me what was coming in from the north." His jaw tightened. "I should have. I came as fast as I could." "Breck's column is standing down," she said. "He wrote a deposition. He knows the order wasn't legitimate." Something moved through Kaelin's face. "You talked him down." "I gave him accurate information and let him make a decision." She held his gaze. "People generally make reasonable decisions when they have accurate information. You might think about that." It landed. She saw it land. He didn't flinch from it, and he didn't deflect it, and that told her something she filed away for later. "Celine, not yet," she said. "There are 40 soldiers in that drainage and a Blackmore pack that was ready to fight them 20 minutes ago, and a deposition that needs to be witnessed and secured before anyone moves anywhere." She turned away from him. "Come inside. We can figure out what you owe me after the operational situation is resolved." She heard him exhale. One breath, long and controlled, then his boots in the snow behind her. The next 2 hours were the specific controlled chaos of a situation being walked back from the edge. Rowan and Kaelin in the same room, which was its own particular tension, 2 alphas with every reason to distrust each other, and enough intelligence between them to know that the immediate problem required cooperation before it allowed for anything else. They managed it. Barely, and with the kind of careful, deliberate civility that was more exhausting than open conflict, but they managed it. Breck's deposition was written and witnessed by Rowan, Lysa, Kaelin, and Orin. It named Vespera Vale specifically, named the seal office channel she'd used, named the authorization language that had been falsified. Breck delivered it with the flat precision of a man performing an act of professional self-preservation that happened to also be the right thing. And Kaelin listened to it with his hands flat on the table and his jaw set, and the particular stillness of someone absorbing information that confirmed what they already knew, while still finding each new specific detail intolerable. When it was done, Kaelin looked at Brecht. "You'll testify before the full council," he said. "Yes," Brecht said. "And you'll name every name you know." "Yes." A pause. "All of them." Kaelin nodded once. "Go get your people out of the drainage and find somewhere to camp. You're not going anywhere until I say." Brecht left. Rowan looked at Kaelin across the table. He had not spoken directly to him since the introductions, and his assessment of Kaelin had the quality of something being conducted at depth. Surface neutral, everything happening underneath. "You're on my territory," Rowan said. It was not a threat. It was geography. "I know," Kaelin said. "I came without authorization, and I brought soldiers who entered without authorization, and I owe you a formal account of that under old charter law." He met Rowan's eyes without posturing. "I'll give whatever account you require." Another long look. "After," Rowan said. "After," Kaelin agreed. Rowan pushed back from the table and walked out without further ceremony. Lysa followed him, pausing at the door to look at Celine with the specific compressed expression that meant she had things to say and had decided not to say them yet. The door closed. In the room, Kaelin, Celine, the fire, and the deposition on the table between them. And from the east corridor, the small, insistent sounds of a child who was awake and unimpressed with being left alone. Kaelin's eyes moved to the corridor. His whole body moved in a way that was entirely involuntary. A shift toward the sound, arrested mid-motion by whatever else he was trying to manage. She watched it happen and felt something she did not have a clean name for. "His name is Lucian," she said. Kaelin looked at her. His throat moved. "He has your jaw," she said. "Everything else is still developing." She paused. "He's 3 weeks old, and he has opinions about being left in a room by himself. Those opinions are loud. Can I—" He stopped, started again. "Can I see him?" She looked at him for a long moment. "After," she said, using Rowan's word deliberately. "We talk first." What? It was not a conversation she had rehearsed. She had thought she would. Had thought, in the months of building and working and thinking, that when this moment came she would have something organized, some sequence of exactly what needed to be said in what order. Instead, she just said it. "You chose the ground under your feet over the truth you already knew," she said. "Not because you were deceived past the point of reason, because the evidence was convenient and the cost of refusing it was high, and you made a calculation." She kept her voice even, not as a performance of control, but because she was past the point where unevenness served her. "I need you to know that I understand the calculation. I can trace the logic of it, and I still need you to stand in this room and tell me that you know what you did." Kaelin was looking at the table. He had been looking at it since Rowan left, and she had been watching the quality of his looking. Not avoidance, not the performed attention of someone waiting for a pause to speak, but the downward focus of someone who had been sitting with something heavy for a long time and was now finally in the room where they were allowed to put it down. "I know what I did," he said. "Tell me." He looked up. "I used the evidence because I needed the question to be resolved, not because I believed it. I knew, when I looked at you in that room, that I didn't believe it. I believed it enough to make the calculation and call it certainty." He paused. "I exiled my pregnant mate on foot in early winter because it was easier than facing the political cost of refusing the accusation." She breathed. "And the child," she said. "The child is mine." His voice roughed. "I knew that in the throne room. I told myself the blood work." He stopped. "I told myself a lot of things. None of them were true, and I knew they weren't true, and I signed the order anyway." The fire was the only sound for a moment. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I came because you told me you were here, that Lucian was here, and because the people threatening you got to use my seal to do it, and that is my debt to answer." He looked at her with the direct, undefended look she was still not entirely ready for. "Tell me what you need. I'll do it." She thought about that. Thought about what it meant that the man who had stood in that throne room and signed an exile order was sitting here offering to do what she needed, rather than what he needed. "I need Vespera removed from every position of power she holds or has used," she said. "I need the council investigation to name names past her. Everyone who enabled the Eastern infrastructure build. Everyone who knew the seal office was compromised. And I need it done in open council, in front of every pack lord in the Confederacy, with public record." She paused. "Not a private arrangement, not a quiet demotion. Public record." "Yes," he said. "And I need Lucian's legitimacy established in that same public record. as heir, before any other question of the throne is addressed. A pause. Something moved through his expression. Not resistance, the opposite of resistance, a quality of relief so acute it looked almost like pain. Yes, he said again, and I need... She stopped. The third thing was harder than the first two because the first two were political and the third one was something else. She looked at the fire, looked back. I need time. I'm not coming back to Thornkeep because you found me. I'm not going to stand beside you in that throne room because the situation requires it. If there is ever anything between us again that isn't institutional, I need it to be because we built it, not because the crisis demanded it. The silence after that was different from the other silences. I know, Kaelin said, quietly. Do you? I have 6 months of evidence that you are not a person who can be managed into a position, he said. I managed a lot in the wrong direction before I understood that. Something shifted in his voice. I'm not trying to recover a position. I'm trying to answer for what I destroyed. Those are different things, and I know they're different things. She looked at him. She believed him. That was the difficult part. She believed him, and believing him was not the same as trusting him. And trusting him would not come from believing him once, but from watching him act consistently across time in ways that had real costs. She understood the distance between where they were and where that would require them to be, and she didn't know if they'd cover it, and she was not going to pretend to know. But she believed him. All right, she said. Now you can meet your son. Banished. The east corridor was the length of the hall away, and Kaelin walked it like a man crossing terrain he was afraid of damaging. The room was small. Corvin's built-in efficiency, low ceiling, the stove keeping the air close and warm. Lucian was in the crib that Corvin had made with his determined, imprecise carpentry, awake now and making his displeasure about solitude known with the steady focus of someone who had identified a problem and expected it to be solved. Kaelin stopped in the doorway. Celine crossed to the crib and picked Lucian up and turned, and Lucian was suddenly face to face with his father across a room, with no one's feelings about that figured out yet. Kaelin went very still. Lucian looked at him. Lucian was 3 weeks old and could not resolve faces at range, but could identify significant changes in his immediate environment, and the change in the room's quality registered, and he stopped making his displeasure sounds and directed his attention at the doorway with the particular focused intensity that he applied to anything new. Then he made a different sound. Quieter, curious. Kaelin's face did the thing again. The breaking thing. Except this time it didn't reassemble into the locked-down version. It just stayed open, and what was in it was everything he had no right to feel and felt anyway. The specific grief of someone confronting simultaneously what they almost lost and what the losing cost. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of Celine and she held Lucian out, and Kaelin took him with the careful, deliberate hands of someone who had never held a 3-week-old and understood that very well about himself. He held the child against his chest and looked down at him and went completely silent. Lucian considered this new situation. He reached out one fist, the blind exploratory reach, and found Kaelin's jaw and pressed against it. Celine watched Kaelin close his eyes. She looked away. They had 4 hours before everything changed again. She should have known. She had known, in the abstract professional way that she had been tracking threat patterns for 6 months, that Vespera would not send 40 soldiers as her only action. She had known that the covert column was one piece of a larger operational picture, and that the larger picture would have redundancies. She had known it, and she had been sitting in the east corridor watching Kaelin hold his son for the first time, and she had let the 4 hours go the way they went. The runner came at midday. He was one of Rowan's Eastern Watch. Young, breathing hard from having run significant distance, face tight with the effort of maintaining composure around something that wanted to be panic. Northern Pass, he said to Rowan, in the main hall where the map table had become the operational center. Another column, larger, 30 riders with 2 wagons. They're armed differently, not standard soldiers, mercenaries. He paused to breathe. And there's someone riding ahead of the column. One person, fast horse, moving like they're leading rather than scouting. Rowan looked at Celine. She looked at the map. Mercenaries with wagons meant sustained operation, not extraction. Wagons meant supplies for something that lasted longer than a single incursion. This was not a second attempt at the same objective. This was the opening of a different campaign entirely. "Vespera," Kaelin said from behind her. He had come into the hall at the runner's arrival. He was still holding Lucian, his son, against his chest, and his voice had the quality of someone who had just arrived at a calculation they had been hoping not to arrive at. "Yes," Celine said. "She's not trying to extract you," he said. "She's trying to control the asset," Celine said. "Not me. Lucian." She kept her voice flat and specific. "A 3-week-old heir in the hands of the right party is worth more than an exiled Luna. If she has Lucian, she controls the succession question regardless of what Brecht's deposition says or what you do in open council." The hall was very quiet. Kaelin looked at his son. Something happened in his face that was different from all the previous things. It was not grief, not damage, not the complicated machinery of guilt and loss. It was something simpler and older and considerably more dangerous. It was the specific quality of someone who had arrived at what they were willing to do. "Rowan," Kaelin said. His voice had changed. It had the alpha register in it now, not performed, just present. The particular quality of command that came from someone who had been holding it back and had stopped holding it back. "Your eastern approach. What's the terrain like for a mounted column moving fast?" Rowan looked at him. The two alphas looking at each other without the careful civility of 2 hours ago. Something more direct now, more real. "Rough," Rowan said. "Narrow in 3 places. Wagons will slow them significantly at the second narrows." "How long does that buy us?" "An hour. Maybe more." Kaelin nodded. He crossed to Celine. He held Lucian out. She took him, and for a moment Kaelin's hands lingered at the transfer, at the warm weight of the child passing between them. And then he let go. He looked at her. "Get him somewhere they can't reach," he said. "Lisa knows this mountain. Go with Lysa." "Kaelin, I have 40 soldiers in that drainage who are standing down from an illegal order," he said. "Brecht is a better commander than whatever she hired. And I know Vespera." His eyes were direct and certain. "I know how she thinks. I know what she does when she thinks she's won." He paused. "Get Lucian out. Let me handle what's coming." She looked at him. She looked at what was in his face. The thing that was not performing anything, that was just the man who had made the worst decision of his life standing in the aftermath of it and trying to be the thing that decision had told her he wasn't. She thought, "I do not know if I trust you yet." She thought, "I know what it means that you're standing here." "Brecht follows your order directly," she said, "not through command chain, directly." "Yes. And Rowan's people aren't your soldiers." "I know that." He looked at Rowan. "I'm asking for the use of the terrain, not the people. Your fighters stay under your command. I'll work with what I brought." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "There's a ridge position above the eastern narrows," he said. "Good sight lines. You can see the approach column 2 miles out." "That's what I need," Kaelin said. Rowan held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Something passed between them that wasn't quite trust and wasn't quite alliance, but was the functional working version of both. "Corvin," Rowan said, "show him the ridge." Lysa moved fast through mountain terrain the way she always did, and Celine matched her pace with Lucian against her chest, wrapped tight, his weight distributed across her core, his face turned toward her heartbeat. He was quiet. He had been quiet since the transfer, since the moment in the hall where the room's quality changed and something in his ambient experience shifted in a way that his 3-week-old nervous system had registered without comprehending. She held him, and moved and thought. She thought about Vespera riding ahead of the column, one person on a fast horse, moving like someone leading. That detail had lodged in her since the runner delivered it. Vespera did not lead from the front. Vespera operated from position, from distance, from the insulated remove of someone who arranged pieces rather than moved among them. Riding at the head of a mercenary column through a mountain pass was not Vespera's pattern, unless she had decided that the normal operation of arrangement had failed twice and that the thing she needed was not more arrangement but presence. Physical, irreversible presence at the point of the action, which meant she was coming herself. Lysa stopped on a flat section of trail and pointed. Below, visible through the trees, the Blackmore settlement sat in its valley arrangement. Smoke from chimneys, the ordinary morning business of a place that had been conducting its ordinary business around an extraordinary 6 months. Above, the ridge Corvin was leading Kaelin toward was visible as a bare line of rock against the pale sky. "There's a shelter," Lysa said, half a mile up. "Old way station, solid, south-facing, so the weather doesn't hit it direct." She looked at Celine. "You stay there. I come back for you when it's clear." "And if it's not clear?" Lisa's expression was the compressed, deliberate version of someone refusing to engage with a hypothetical they considered unproductive. "Then I come back sooner." Celine looked down at the settlement, at the ridge, at the narrow approach to the eastern narrows where a mounted column with wagons would slow at the second narrows and give Kaelin an hour. She thought about what Kaelin's face had looked like when he held Lucian for the first time. She thought about Vespera on a fast horse at the head of a column, deciding that arrangement had failed and that presence was required. She thought about the fact that she had spent 6 months building intelligence on the Eastern administrative structure, on the Confederacy's compromised council seats, on the supply chain patterns that traced back to the Southern Coalition, intelligence that Brecht's deposition had started to validate, but that was still sitting in the correspondence room, in her files, organized in the way that only she fully understood. "The files," she said. Lysa looked at her. "In the correspondence room. If something happens to the settlement, those files are the proof behind the deposition. Brecht's testimony names names, but my files show the infrastructure, the supply patterns, the construction timeline." She paused. "They need to be out of the correspondence room. I'll get them after I get you to the way station." "Get them now. I know the trail to the way station. You showed me twice." She looked at Lysa directly. "I can move faster alone without you matching my pace to mine. Get the files. Meet me at the way station." Lysa looked at her for the long moment of someone running the actual risk calculation rather than the reflexive protective calculation. 20 minutes, Lysa said. "You move steady, and you don't stop." "I know how to walk a mountain." Lysa turned and went down the trail at a pace that confirmed why Celine had suggested going separately. Celine turned uphill. Hoos. The way station was exactly what Lysa had described. Solid, south-facing, built by someone who understood that useful shelter didn't need to be comfortable. It needed to not kill you. She got the door open, got inside, got Lucian settled in the layer of her outer coat, and let herself breathe for a moment in the relative quiet. Below her, she could hear nothing from the settlement. That was either normal or it wasn't, and from here she couldn't tell which. She sat with her back against the wall and Lucian against her chest, and listened to the mountain. She thought about what a king owed. Not in the abstract. She had spent enough time with the abstract to have formed her position, and she didn't need to revisit it. She thought about it specifically. What Kaelin Thornhart owed her, owed Lucian, owed the people in the drainage whose lives had been put in danger by an operation run through his compromised seal. She thought about whether the owing was the same thing as the making right, and whether the making right was possible, and whether possibility was the same thing as likelihood. She didn't reach a conclusion. She reached the edge of the thing and stayed there, which was the honest position. Lucian moved against her, the small fish movement, the adjustment of position that was already becoming familiar. She put her hand on his back. She heard the sound before she identified it. A single horse, moving fast on the lower trail, not Lysa's footsteps. Moving toward the way station, not away from it. She was on her feet before the sound resolved. The door of the way station had no lock. She put her back against the wall beside it. Lucian held against her with one arm, her other hand finding the knife at her belt. Mira's knife, the one from under the mattress, that had traveled every mile she had traveled. The horse stopped. Footsteps on the approach. The door opened. Vespera Vale stood in the entrance of the way station, alone, without the column, without the performance of court composure she had worn in the throne room. She was trail dirty, and her hair was pulled back in a way that had come partially undone, and she was breathing with the effort of hard riding. She looked like a person who had made a specific decision about how far she was willing to go and had arrived at the outer edge of it. She looked at Celine. She looked at Lucian. Something moved through her face that was not triumph. It was something more complicated and older, something that Celine had not expected, and she held it in her attention without letting her guard change. "I'm alone," Vesper said. "I can see that." "The column is still in the eastern narrows." She stayed in the doorway. "I rode ahead because I needed to be in this room without 30 witnesses." Celine kept her back against the wall, the knife in her hand, her eyes on Vesper's hands, her posture, the doorway behind her. "Then say what you came to say," she said. Vespera looked at Lucien. The look was not predatory. That was what Celine could not quite account for. It was the look of someone facing the specific weight of a consequence they had understood intellectually and were now confronting in the actual world. "I built everything around the assumption that he wouldn't exist," Vespera said, "or that if he existed, you wouldn't have survived to protect him." "And here we both are," Celine said. Vespera was quiet for a moment. "The column in the Narrows doesn't know what I'm doing right now. They have orders that don't include this conversation." She looked up from Lucien to Celine's face. "I came here because the deposition exists, and I know what's in it, and I know what happens next if you take it back to Thornkeep." "Yes," Celine said. "You do." "I'm not going to beg," Vespera said. "I know you're not. But I am going to tell you—" She stopped. Something moved through her face that was raw and undefended in a way that Celine had not seen from her before and was not certain she was prepared for. "I had reasons. Not good ones. Not ones that justify what I did to you. But reasons." She pressed her lips together. "I want you to know there were reasons." Celine looked at her. She thought about the throne room, about the specific architecture of what Vespera had built, the testimony, the correspondence, the bloodwork interference, the year or more of patient, precise construction. She thought about what kind of reasons existed inside a person who could build that. She did not feel what she expected to feel. She felt something quieter and more complicated. "I know there were reasons," she said. "There are always reasons." She looked at Vespera steadily. "That's not what determines what happens next." Vespera's jaw tightened. "What does?" "What you do right now," Celine said. "In this room. Before your column reaches the second narrows and runs into 40 crown soldiers and a Blackmore Ridge position, and a man who has been taking apart everything you built for 4 months and is significantly motivated to finish the job." The mountain wind moved through the doorway between them. "Call them off," Celine said. "Go back down that trail and call your column off. Accept what's coming in open council. Testify to what you did and why, and who else was involved. All of it." She kept her voice level. "That's the only path that ends with you having any standing at all in what comes after." Vespera was looking at her with an expression that was doing several things at once, none of them simple. "And you'll—" She stopped. "I'm not in the business of promises about what I'll do," Celine said. "I'm in the business of accurate information. The accurate information is that the deposition exists, my files exist, Kaylin is on that ridge right now, and the only version of the next hour where you are not entirely destroyed is the one where you make a different choice than the ones you've been making." Somewhere below the sound came, not the column in the Narrows, something else, a single sharp sound, distant, carrying up the mountain in the cold air with the specific quality of something structural giving way. Then voices, fast and indistinct, and the particular percussion of a situation that was no longer staying inside its parameters. Vespera's head turned toward the sound. Celine's grip on the knife tightened. And in her arms, 3 weeks old and entirely uninterested in anyone's plans for him, Lucien Thornhart pressed his face against her chest and breathed the steady breath of someone who had already decided that wherever his mother was, that was where things were safe. The sound from below got louder. Vespera looked at Celine. Celine looked at Vespera. The next choice belonged to both of them. The sound from below kept coming. Not the sound of a battle. She had heard enough accounts of actual combat to know what that sounded like, and this was not it. This was the sound of a situation changing its shape. Voices calling to each other in a register that was urgent but not desperate. The movement of horses being brought to stillness. Orders carried up the mountain in pieces. Vespera was still in the doorway. She had not moved since the sound started. She was listening to it with the particular quality of attention that belonged to someone hearing the edges of their own plan coming apart. Not the catastrophic collapse, just the slow recognition that the pieces were no longer where she had placed them. "That's your column," Celine said. Stopping. Vespera's jaw was tight. "Yes." Someone gave them a reason to stop. "Yes." Celine watched her. The woman in the doorway was not the woman from the throne room. That woman had been composed in the way that required enormous continuous effort to maintain a performance of ease that was really a performance of control. This woman was composed in a different way. The exhausted, stripped-down way of someone who had run out of the energy required for performance and was standing in what was underneath it. "You sent the signal," Celine said. Not a question. Vespera looked at her for a moment. "I sent it before I came up the trail." She paused. "I made the decision before I got here. I just needed to stand in this room first." "Why?" The question sat there. Vespera looked at Lucien, at the child against Celine's chest, his face turned inward, his breathing the slow, steady breathing of someone completely uninvested in the politics of the moment. "Because I needed to see what I had actually been trying to destroy," she said. "Not what I told myself I was doing, what I was actually doing." Something moved through her face, brief and unguarded. "He's very small." 3 weeks, Celine said. "Yes." She looked up. "I know what I owe. I knew it before I rode up here. She stopped. "I needed it to be my choice, not something that happened to me. My choice." Celine held her gaze. She understood that. She understood it in the way you understood something that touched a part of your own experience, the need for agency inside a situation that had collapsed all your other options. The need for the last decision to be yours, even if all it decided was the manner of the ending. "Then come down off the mountain," Celine said, "and make it your choice all the way through." They came down together, which was not something Celine had planned and which she understood, as it was happening, to be the right thing regardless of planning. Vespera walked the trail ahead of her without being asked to. The column was standing down in the valley approach. 30 riders and 2 wagons arranged in the loose formation of people who had received a contradicting order and were waiting for the contradiction to resolve itself. They watched Vespera come down the trail, and they watched Celine behind her, and whatever they made of it quietly. Kalen was coming down from the ridge when they reached the settlement. He saw Vespera first. His face did what it did when he was controlling something significant. The jaw, the stillness, the specific quality of locked attention. Then he saw Celine behind her, and Lucien, and the locked attention shifted into something else that he did not entirely manage to contain. He crossed the debris field. It was still there, the morning's avalanche, already starting to settle and compact, and he stopped in front of Vespera. He looked at her for a long time. "The deposition exists," he said. His voice was quiet and entirely certain. "My files, Brecht's testimony, Celine's administrative intelligence, all of it." He paused. "I'm going to take every piece of it to the full Confederacy Council. I'm going to name every name. I'm going to do this in open session with public record." He paused again. "What happens to you in that process depends in large part on what you do in the next 30 seconds. Vespera looked at him. Her expression was not performing anything. "I know," she said. "Then talk." She talked. She talked for 20 minutes, standing in the cold of the Blackmore settlement yard with the column behind her and Rowan's people watching from the settlement's edges. She named names, not just her own, but the council members who had taken payments, the administrators who had routed correspondence, the Eastern Pack Lords who had let the infrastructure build proceed on their territory in exchange for future consideration. She named the seal office contact who had processed the fabricated correspondence. She named the garrison physician who had altered the blood work assessment. She said all of it in the flat, precise register of someone delivering information rather than confessing, without self-pity, without plea, with the specific dignity of a person who had decided that the last thing they could control was how thoroughly they told the truth. When she finished, Kalen looked at Rowan. "I need to keep her here until we can transport to Thornkeep for council session," he said. Under whatever terms you set. Rowan looked at Vespera, then at Kaelin. She stays in Blackmore custody. My terms. Your terms, Kaelin said. The council session was 3 weeks later. Thornkeep's great hall, the same black stone and iron brackets, the same ceiling disappearing into shadow, was packed beyond its normal capacity. Pack lords who had never attended the same session were in the same room. Representatives from every Confederacy territory, from the old Charter Mountain Pacts to the Southern Coalition whose own lord was the subject of the proceedings. Brecht sat in the witness position with the deposition in front of him. Oren sat beside him with the seal office records. The Eastern administrative files that Celine had built across 6 months in the Blackmore correspondence room were laid out on the evidence table in the order she had organized them, which was the order that told the clearest story. She stood at the evidence table when she was called, and she presented it herself. She had thought about whether to ask someone else to present it, whether standing in this hall, in front of this assembly, was the right position for her, or whether it would read as too personal, too interested, too much the performance of a grievance rather than the delivery of fact. She had decided that the person who built the record was the person who understood it completely, and understanding it completely was what the council needed from whoever stood at that table. She presented for 2 hours. She did not editorialize. She let the pattern speak because the pattern was damning enough on its own. The supply chain documentation, the construction timelines, the correspondence routing that had been systematically bypassed through compromised channels, the blood work assessment that had been deliberately corrupted, and the physician who had done it. When she finished, the room was the particular kind of quiet that meant everyone in it was absorbing something too large to respond to immediately. The presiding council elder, a man in his 70s named Flourish, who had been running Confederacy sessions since before Kaelin's father took the throne, looked at the evidence table for a long moment. "The council will recess," he said. They recessed for 4 hours. When they came back, the vote was unanimous. Each quota. Vesperval was stripped of her title, her coalition representation, and every appointment she held through the Confederacy's administrative structure. She was exiled from all Confederacy territory under a permanent bar. The council members who had taken payments were removed, and their cases referred for individual proceedings. The Eastern administrator who had routed the compromised correspondence was removed. The physician who had altered the blood work was referred to the medical council for permanent revocation. It was done in public session, in open record, as Celine had required. Vespera stood through the reading of the council's decision the way she had stood on the mountain, without performance, without plea, with the stripped-down composure of someone who had made their last choice and was standing inside its consequences. When the presiding elder finished, she turned and walked out of the hall, and no one stopped her. And that was the end of it. Celine watched her go. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She had expected something cleaner, not triumph. She had never been interested in triumph, but resolution. The specific settling that came when a structural problem was fixed. Instead, she felt something more complicated, something that acknowledged the resolution without finding it simple. Vespera had done real damage. People had paid real costs. The council's decision didn't undo any of that. It just meant the damage was formally acknowledged and the source removed. That was what accountability looked like. Not healing, not repair, just the formal acknowledgement that something wrong had happened and the removal of its source. She could work with that. She had been working with less. Mistress. Lucian was 6 weeks old when they carried him into the Thornkeep throne room for the legitimacy declaration. He was not impressed by the architecture. He looked at the ceiling, that enormous shadowed ceiling his great-great-grandfather had designed to make people feel small, with the focused, uncertain attention of someone whose eyes were still learning how to work at range. And then he looked away, deciding the ceiling was not the most interesting available input. Celine held him while Farosh read the legitimacy declaration into the council record. Kaelin stood beside her, close but not touching, in the careful, deliberate proximity of two people navigating a shared space that had not yet figured out what it was. When Farosh finished, he looked at Lucian over the tops of his reading spectacles with the expression of a man who had been running councils for 50 years, and had arrived at an advanced state of perspective about what mattered and what didn't. "He has the look of his grandfather," Farouk said, to no one in particular, and moved on to the next item of business. Celine looked down at Lucien. He was looking at the torch bracket nearest to them, the ironwork, the moving light, with the expression of someone who had found the most interesting available input after all. She did not move back into the Luna's chambers. She had been given rooms on the east wing, separate, her own household, with Corvin installed as her administrative assistant because he had asked to come, and because Rowan had released him with the specific expression of someone who considered the request entirely predictable. Mira was there when she arrived, having appeared in the East Wing corridor 2 days before Celine returned to Thornkeep with the expression of someone who had never been anywhere else. She had looked at Mira for a moment, and then they had simply gone inside, because some things did not require the language of reunion. She worked. She was not Luna in the formal institutional sense. That question had not been resolved, and she had not resolved it, had told Kaelin and the council that her position within Thornkeep's administrative structure would be determined by her own assessment of what she wanted and what was appropriate, not by automatic reinstatement. There were pack lords who found that response baffling. There were others who found it, she heard secondhand, admirable. She found it accurate, which was the only standard she was currently applying. She ran the administrative practice she had been building since Blackmore, the correspondence work, the Confederacy interface, the intelligence pattern analysis that had cracked Vespera's network open. She ran it from the East Wing with Corvin and Mira, and increasingly, 2 young court administrators who had been watching how the Eastern Ledger dispute had resolved and had drawn conclusions. Kaelin came to her office 3 times in the first 2 weeks. Each time he knocked, each time he waited. She registered the knocking. She registered the waiting. She said nothing about it, but she registered it. The 3rd time, she had Mira pour him tea. The conversation that mattered happened on an evening in the 7th week. She had been walking the east parapet. She had claimed it as hers in the 1st week, a place to think with the mountain wind coming off the northern peaks. And she had not expected company, but she heard his footsteps on the stone before she heard him speak, and she recognized them, and she did not send him away. He stood beside her at the parapet rail. Below, the city of Thornkeep went about its evening in the way cities did. Smoke from hearths, the sounds of ordinary life carrying up on the cold air. They were quiet for a while. "I'm going to get it wrong again," he said. "Not the same wrong, but something." She looked at the city. "I know. I need you to know that I know that." He was looking at the northern peaks. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I understand exactly what I did and exactly why, and I've resolved it all into something clear and finished. I haven't. I'm still working out the shape of it." "I know that too," she said. "Does it—" He stopped, started again. "Is that enough?" She thought about what enough meant. She had been thinking about it for weeks, in the East Wing, in the corridor where Lucien slept, in the Thornkeep correspondence room where she was building something new out of the same skills she had built in exile. What enough meant in a situation where the damage was real and the person who had done it was also real and was standing beside her on a parapet in the cold, telling the truth with the specific difficulty of someone for whom the truth cost something to deliver. "It's a start," she said. "That's what it is. It's a start." He was quiet for a moment. "Lucien," he said. The name in his mouth was still something he was learning how to carry. He smiled this morning. Mira said it was too early, that it was just reflex. But I was there. She felt the corner of her mouth move. "I know, I was in the doorway." He looked at her. "You didn't say anything," he said. "I wasn't sure if you needed the audience." He was quiet. Then, "I didn't, but I would have wanted it anyway." She looked at the peaks. The wind was coming in steadier now, the mountain's particular conversation with itself. She thought about what it meant to be in the same place as someone who had broken something important and was trying, not perfectly, not without the ongoing probability of further imperfection, to understand the shape of what they had broken. She thought about what it meant to decide, not to forgive, not yet. That was not what this was, but to decide that standing beside someone in the cold while they told the truth had a value she was willing to acknowledge. She thought about the carved wolf on the windowsill in the Luna's chambers that she had left on purpose because picking it up would have meant something she wasn't ready to mean. She thought about the fact that it was still there. She had checked in the first week for no reason she would have named aloud. "He's going to have questions," she said. "Lucian, when he's old enough, about what happened, about why he was born on a mountain in the middle of winter in someone else's pack." "I know. I'm going to answer them honestly." "I know that too." His voice was even. "So will I." She looked at him. He was looking at the mountains, the profile she had looked at for 3 years, and had spent 6 months unlearning and had not unlearned as completely as she had intended. "The walls," she said. "The east wing. I need the garden on the east side converted into working space. The light is better for document work, and Corvin keeps complaining about the correspondence room's ventilation." He blinked. The shift was sufficiently abrupt that it took him half a second to track it. "I'll have it done. And I need a direct courier line to Rowan Blackmore. Blackmore is the most sophisticated administrative intelligence operation in the Northern Range. They should have direct communication with Thornkeep's court, not a relay through the Confederacy channel." "Done." "And Lysa." She looked back at the city. "She should be offered a formal liaison position if she wants it. Blackmore Thornkeep. She won't take it. She's Mountain. She won't leave. But the offer should be made formally. She's earned that." Kaelin was quiet for a moment. "You've been running this in your head for weeks," he said. "I've been running it since the mining camp," she said. "Some problems it helps to solve in advance." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, the compressed version, the one that came when something was genuinely unexpected, and he didn't quite manage to hold the response to it completely inside. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Celine," he said, just her name, the 2 syllables, the way he said it when there was nothing else to put around it. "Not yet," she said, quietly. Not a refusal. He heard the difference. She could see him hear it. But not never. He nodded. He looked back at the mountains. They stood there in the cold until Lucian, in the room below the parapet, made the sound he made when he was done sleeping and had opinions about it, and then they both turned from the mountains and went back inside. The spring came late to Thornkeep, the way it often did at that altitude. Not a gradual warming, but a sudden shift. One morning the cold releasing its grip between 1 hour and the next, the particular smell of thaw coming off the mountains in a rush. Lucian was 4 months old. He was, by the assessment of everyone in the East Wing household, a person with strong opinions and very little patience for the gap between his intentions and his current physical capabilities. He had decided he was interested in everything he could see and frustrated by everything he could not yet reach, and he communicated this position clearly and at volume. Celine had taken him out to the East Garden, the converted space, the light that was better for document work, which turned out to also be better for a child who had opinions about the outdoors. And she was sitting in the spring sun with him on her lap and the first quarter's administrative summary in her other hand. She was reading. He was attempting to consume the edge of the document, which she redirected twice before giving up on the document and letting him have her sleeve instead. She looked at him. 4 months old, and already the jaw was unmistakable. And the eyes were developing into something that she was starting to understand were going to be his own. Neither hers nor Kaelin's exactly, but some third thing that had arrived through both of them and decided to be itself. She thought about what he would become, not in the specific future planning way. She had too much respect for the unpredictability of becoming to make detailed plans for another person's life. But in the broader way, the way you thought about the conditions you were trying to create and the values you were trying to build into the ground around a child so that when they grew into themselves, they had something solid to stand on. She wanted him to know that people were capable of great wrong and still capable of change. She wanted him to know that accountability was not the same as punishment, and forgiveness was not the same as forgetting, and trust was not a single moment, but a practice across time. She wanted him to know that power over other people was the least interesting kind of power, and that the most interesting kind was what you built when you understood your own edges and worked within and against them honestly. She wanted him to know that she had walked across a mountain in early winter and kept going because he was worth keeping going for, and that the keeping going had nothing to do with him being an heir or a piece on a board or a claim on a throne. It was just that he existed and she was his mother, and some things were that simple underneath all the complexity you laid on top of them. Footsteps on the garden path. She looked up. Kaelin stopped at the edge of the garden space. He had the look he had developed across the past months, the one that asked without asking whether it was all right to come in. She had not told him to stop asking. She was not ready to tell him that yet. She moved her hand in the small gesture that meant yes. He came and sat on the bench beside her. Lucian, detecting a new presence, redirected his sleeve consumption project toward the more interesting option of Kaelin's hand, which he grabbed with both fists and attempted to pull toward his mouth with great determination. Kaelin looked at his son attempting to consume his hand, and something happened in his expression that was very quiet and very complete. "The Eastern Council appointment," he said. "Farrokh wants to fill the vacancy from the Stoner Pack. I think he's wrong." "He is wrong," she said. "Stoner Pack owes the Southern Coalition a debt from the winter allocation dispute. You put a Stoner representative on the Eastern Council right now, you've replicated the exact problem you just removed. What's the right move? Leave it vacant for one session. Let the other Eastern Council members understand that the seat is being filled carefully rather than quickly. Then bring the Crestfall Pack forward. They've been underrepresented on the Council for 12 years, and they have no existing debt relationships with either coalition." He was quiet for a moment. "I wouldn't have seen the Stoner debt angle." "You would have eventually." She looked at him. "You see most things eventually. You just sometimes see them after you've already acted." He absorbed that without defense. That was something that had changed across the months. Not that he never pushed back, he did, sometimes correctly, but that his first response to hard information was no longer to find the alternative interpretation that required less from him. "I'm trying to see them faster," he said. "I know you are." Lucian had succeeded in getting Kaelin's hand close enough to gum experimentally. He applied himself to this project with the focused satisfaction of someone who had achieved an objective through persistence. "He's going to be relentless," Kaelin said. "He already is." "He gets it from you." She looked at the garden. The spring light was coming in at the angle that only happened in early season, when the sun was still finding its higher trajectory and the shadows fell long and sharp. "He gets it from both of us," she said. Kaelin went very still for a moment. She felt it without looking at him. The specific quality of stillness that meant something had mattered more than he was going to say. "Yes," he said, quietly. "I think that's right." Jim. That evening, she went to the Luna's chambers. Not for any practical reason. She had everything she needed in the East Wing, which was hers in a way the Luna's chambers had never quite been. That institutional grandeur never having fit the way her correspondence room did. She went because there was something there she had left behind on purpose. The chambers were maintained while cleaned, aired, the fire laid but not lit. They smelled of old stone and the particular cold that came off high windows. She crossed to the windowsill. The carved wolf was there. Still there, exactly where she had left it. The rough-cut dark wood. The shape that looked more like a dog than a wolf. She had left it on purpose because picking it up would have meant something she wasn't ready to mean. She stood there for a moment. She thought about what it meant now. Not the same thing it had meant in the room the morning of the exile. That had been a closed door, a deliberate leave-taking, the choice to walk out with her spine straight instead of carrying something she would have had to break to hold. This was different. This was not the same room she had walked out of, and she was not the same person who had walked out of it. And the carved wolf on the windowsill was not the same object it had been, because nothing was the same object it had been after enough time had worked on it. She picked it up. It was lighter than she remembered. The wood had dried further across the season, the weight reduced by time the way most things were. Not diminished, just more itself. The excess worked away. She held it for a moment. Then she put it in her pocket and walked back down the corridor toward the East Wing, toward the room where her son was sleeping his deep, certain sleep, toward the work and the life and the ongoing, unfinished project of building something true out of everything that had survived the breaking. The torch brackets threw long shadows on the stone. The mountain wind worked at the high windows, the mountain's permanent conversation with itself. Thornkeep settled into its evening, and somewhere in the distance, barely audible, the sound of Lucian Thornheart waking up and announcing himself to the night, not in distress, but in the particular confident declaration of someone who had arrived in the world with opinions and intended to share them. Celine's step quickened, not from worry, but from the instinct that was already entirely its own thing, the pull toward the specific voice in the specific room. She went to him. The hall behind her was empty, and the torchlight was steady, and somewhere in the long history of the stone under her feet, all the things that had happened and the things that were still happening were already part of the same story. Not resolved into something clean, not tied off at the edges, but real and continuing and entirely worth the walking. She went to her son. She did not look back.